The narrative opens in Amsterdam, where Theo exists in a state of fearful isolation, holed up in a hotel room filled with dreary light and permanent chill. Every aspect of his environment demonstrates how much the outside world continues. Normally, holiday lights twinkle. Festive music floats across the canals while Theo wallows in anxious stasis. With little to sustain him except cigarettes, vodka, and feverish isolation, he attempts to parse the news from the Dutch newspapers, seeking some clue as to his own fate while being unable to decipher their language. He becomes intensely acquainted with every feature of his confining room, attentive to its blend of Protestant austerity and Baroque luxury, fixating on trivial decorative paintings as though they contain some cipher to the mysteries that haunt him. His days blur together, full of vague terror and somatic distress, with time marked only by the tolling of foreign church bells and the rustle of room service trolleys in the corridor. In this suffocating liminality, a dream of his mother pierces his stagnant routine. The vision is vivid. He encounters her in the mirror, an image so intense and detailed that her presence renews his longing and magnifies his loss. The dream is a visitation rather than a mere memory, a brief fusion of past joy and the present's permanent ache. His reaction to this encounter, profound happiness mixed with the despair of knowing the encounter cannot last, illuminates the abiding power she continues to hold over him, even years after her death. Theo's recollections move from the ephemeral space of dreams to the irrecoverable moments of childhood, most particularly to the pivotal day that fractured his life irrevocably. His mother emerges not only as the lost object of grief, but as a living presence shaped by habits, idiosyncrasies, and a singular personal elegance. She is a study in contradictions, strikingly beautiful, yet uncomfortable before the camera, delicate in constitution, yet vibrant in movement and quick-tongued humor. She is inseparable from the rich tapestry of her background, a mixture of Irish and Cherokee roots, childhood spent among horses and small Kansas towns, and an urban adulthood marked by both financial struggle and creative aspiration. Their bond, in Theo's memory, is colored by a personal mythos of shared adventures, mutual secret understanding, and the ineffable intensity of parental love shortly before it is cut off forever. The morning of April 10th, 14 years earlier, unspools in granular detail. It is a day washed in the humid aftermath of a spring storm, the otherwise unremarkable rhythm of a New York morning made portentous only by its retrospective significance. Theo narrates the trivial embarrassments and crises of adolescence: his recent suspension from school, fear of parental wrath, financial precariousness after his father's abrupt desertion, with a sense of mounting dread. This suspension is not only a disciplinary issue but is weighted with everything else that has already gone wrong: the collapse of his family, his mother's overwork and exhaustion, and his own confused attempts to evade responsibility for misdeeds that include, among other things, illicit excursions into vacation homes with Tom Cable. These ordinary troubles serve to heighten tension and underscore how easily disaster may be mistaken for banality when it first appears. Theo's mother, straining to project calm, is worn down by fatigue, her anxiety for her son evident in the smallest gestures. The doorman, Goldie, acts as both witness and minor comforter, their banter serving to underline the undercurrents of tension between mother and son. The taxi ride to the Upper East Side is a compressed agony. The car's foul scent, his mother's sudden illness, and the general sense of wrongness that infects everything. Once forced out of the cab, Theo is forced to become momentarily the caretaker, his mother unsteady but determined, both of them flailing awkwardly through a cityscape that seems both beautiful and indifferent. The looming threat of the coming disciplinary meeting is only one strand in a tapestry of uncertain future, in which every interaction is tinged with worry over money, loss, and the possibility of punishment. Finding respite in the familiar territory of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Theo and his mother shelter from another downpour. The museum is transformed for Theo, as always, into a labyrinthine haven, a palace of endless rooms, each filled with artifacts of vanished grandeur, which provide a buffer against the confusion and disappointment of the world outside. For Theo, the museum is intimately tied to his mother's presence and the moments of shared discovery that she both inspires and directs. Wandering the special exhibition devoted to Dutch Golden Age painting, his mother is alive with enthusiasm. Her lively commentary on trompe l'oeil, the symbolic use of decay and insects in still lifes, and the rapid brushwork of Franz Hals reveals not only her knowledge, but the way she sees the world, and teaches Theo to see alongside her. Within this context, discrete tensions persist. Theo detaching slightly, drawn to the mysterious red-haired girl moving through the galleries, his mind wandering between his mother's art historical monologues and his own burgeoning adolescent desires and anxieties. The girl, Pippa, accompanied by an elderly man, the old man, is observed with the same longing and speculative curiosity that has led Theo into trouble before. Strangers and fleeting encounters occupy as much of his imagination as the great masterpieces and their painted mysteries. Their shared attention is drawn to the exhibition's centerpiece, a small painting, the eponymous Goldfinch by Carol Fabricius, whose backstory as a lone survivor of a historic explosion foreshadows the catastrophe yet to come. The painting stands as both artwork and symbol, a vulnerable yet resilient remnant, which Theo's mother contextualizes with historical knowledge and personal memory. Her reverence for the piece, layered with references to childhood fascination, the tragedies of carelessness and war, and the miraculous survival of beauty through history, is depicted as a moment of tender unity between parent and child, a moment poised, tragically, on the threshold of devastation. As Theo is swept up in anticipation, nervously considering how or whether to approach the mysterious girl, the underlying sense of unreality thickens. The movements of guards, the growing unease in the museum's atmosphere, and his mother's impending return all preserve the feeling of time held taut before the snap. In a few shattering seconds, ordinary life is broken open by violence. A detonation, a rush of sound and chaotic force, bodies cast down and Theo's consciousness ejected from its habitual circuits. Emerging into consciousness amid blasted debris, Theo's first impressions are filtered through trauma, confusion, and a kind of sensory derangement. He is disoriented in the ruined museum and unfamiliar terrain of gray rubble, chemical smoke, and jagged metal, strewn with the incongruities of everyday belongings now transformed by violence. The sight is eerily silent, punctuated only by distant alarms and the phantom ringing in his ears. His first impulse, overwhelming amid the brokenness, is to search for some familiar emblem or item, a bottle of water, a piece of home, yet instead he comes upon the battered form of the old man. Their encounter is a moment of unexpected intimacy amid horror. The frail, dying man, whom Theo recognizes as Pippa's companion, is desperate to communicate, muddling together reminiscences, delusions, and cryptic instructions. In his confusion, the old man mistakes Theo for someone known and trusted, possibly addressing him as he might address Pippa herself. Their conversation is distorted by blood loss, trauma, and urgent necessity. The old man recognizes the danger to something precious, directing Theo's attention to the painting hidden among the ruins and compelling him to safeguard it no matter what. This act, the symbolic and literal inheritance of the Goldfinch, establishes unmistakably the trajectory of Theo's ensuing life, the mingling of beauty, accident, and guilt that will define his psychic landscape forever after. The old man's death is presented not as a mere loss but as the transmission of a secret. Through the forced bequest of a ring engraved with Hobart and Blackwell, as well as his insistence on passing the painting to Theo's care, he imparts a link to a world beyond the present devastation, directing the boy toward Hobie in a convergence of fate that will echo through the rest of the narrative. Not long after, Theo, still battered, hallucinating, and clutching his charged burden, begins to extricate himself from the ruined space. His departure from the museum is a test of will and determination, navigating through unstable tunnels of debris, past the shattered detritus of what had been a temple to art and civilization, and through the uncanny stillness of rooms now transformed by death. The visceral details, the stink of blood and chemicals, the brush of bodies underfoot, the shifting collapse of ceilings reflect the trauma that will haunt Theo. His attempts to find his mother among the dead, to refuse the finality of her absence even in the face of overwhelming visual evidence, underscores the denial and disbelief of the recently bereaved. After braving perilous corridors, hidden doors, and the deserted infrastructure of the museum's staff area, Theo bursts out into the chaos of the post-blast city. The contrast is jarring. Within the cordoned-off streets and panicked crowds is a world of ambulance sirens, fire trucks, and desperate officials. The general panic is compounded by persistent rumors of a second bomb, which keeps rescue efforts on edge and prevents immediate re-entry. Theo, stumbling and still in shock, attempts to alert those around him to the presence of survivors inside, but is batted aside by the overwhelming mechanism of crisis response. The magnitude of the catastrophe creates conditions where individual voices are swept aside, whether frantic or helpless. In the midst of pandemonium, Theo remains fixated on his mother, alternating between the desperate hope of finding her among the fleeing or injured and the mounting, irrational conviction that their separation cannot be final. So much of the narrative momentum is caught in this oscillation between hope and despair, between the wish for reunion and the evidence of irreversible loss. The crowd's inexorable drive carries Theo away from the museum and his chance of seeing his mother again, the social and bureaucratic machinery of disaster response indifferent to his personal catastrophe. This chapter, spanning from anxious confinement in an Amsterdam hotel room to the explosion in the New York Museum, is shot through with themes that reverberate throughout Theo's life. The fatal intersection of beauty and violence, the suddenness with which fate can upend the ordinary, the mystery of survival and accident, and the inextricable threads of guilt and loss. The Goldfinch painting, introduced as both a singular survivor and a piece of history marked by violence, quickly becomes burdened with the responsibility not only of preservation, but of meaning the object through which Theo's fractured past and uncertain future will be filtered. The events described: his mother's death, the inheritance of the painting and ring, the first encounter with Hobie's world forge in an instant the basic conditions of Theo's adolescence and adulthood. At the root of all this is Theo's acute, ongoing grief. Losses tick through the physical, the sensorial, and the symbolic. Dreams of the mother's presence, the inability of photographs to capture her essence, the search among the dead for her familiar form, and the final, desperate hope that some other, more benevolent reality might prevail. The trauma leaves a deeply fissured psyche. Theo's actions in the immediate aftermath, his confused attempts to search out the living, his almost involuntary acceptance of the dying man's charge, his irrational persistence in believing his mother might yet reappear, are all shaped by the incomprehensibility of sudden loss and the helplessness of one who survives by chance. Amid all this, the city itself is both setting and symbol. The rainy, ordinary New York street at the outset, teeming with private troubles and shared rituals, and the chaotic, emergency-glutted avenue after the bombing. The everyday world and the world shattered by violence lie side by side, each bleeding into the other, making clear the fragility of security and meaning. The painting, miraculously rescued from destruction, will become the living thread through which Theo's guilt, longing, and efforts at self-salvation are thereafter woven. The deeply subjective presentation shaped by memory, dissociation, childish reasoning, and trauma invites the reader into Theo's persistent confusion between event and memory, dream and reality, the past and the wreckage of the present. The chapter is punctuated by moments of longing for beauty in art, in parental love, in fleeting glimpses of strangers, and the knowledge that all such beauty is under perpetual threat by neglect, violence, or the inescapable passage of time. Theo's journey out of the museum and into the world transformed by loss inaugurates the continual struggle he will face, the desire to hold on to what is beautiful and meaningful in the face of an indifferent and destructive world, the effort to parse the meaning of survival and to live with the burden of undeserved inheritance. The exquisite tension of the chapter arises from the juxtaposition of luminous specificity, every brushstroke in the paintings, every remembered inflection of the mother's voice, every sensation of harm, warmth, or fear with the obliterating force of accident and death. Theo's perspective, shaped by anxieties both personal and historical, shows how the moments before catastrophe are always marked by mundane concerns retrospectively rendered insignificant, and how, in the aftermath, all meaning is sought in what remains: objects, memories, gestures, and the impossible longing for the lost. In the devastation, Theo emerges not only shell-shocked and orphaned, but as the latest in a long lineage of accidental guardians of beauty, fated to bear both the wonders of survival and the curses of guilt and attachment. The legacy embodied in the Goldfinch painting, the ring, and the directives that accompany them is not one of simple blessing or curse, but of the ongoing, difficult work of finding meaning in chaos, of reconstructing a sense of self from fragments, and of living on past the point where all landmarks seem to have been erased. Within this maelstrom, Theo's inner world seethes. His grief is isolating and bottomless, but filtered through the same intense attention to the world it's paintings, the stories of strangers, the small correspondences of fate that provided the deepest joy during his mother's life. The narrative's immersion in his point of view, replete with associative leaps, loops of memory, dreams, and sensations half remembered, grounds the reader in the very experience of trauma. Pain, confusion, and longing are rendered palpable. The boundaries between the living and the dead, the ordinary and extraordinary, shift and blur. The first phase of Theo's odyssey ends not with catharsis, but with bewildered propulsion, the need to survive, imposed by fate and compelled by chance, sweeping him along from the destruction of his old life toward uncertain futures. The consequences of this day, the secret of the painting, the unkept appointment with his mother, the death of the old man, the new responsibility toward Hobie, and the continuing, insistent ache of longing form the bedrock of everything that will follow, shaping not only the literal events of his adolescence and adulthood, but the spiritual and moral questions to which the novel will return. What do we owe to the beauty that survives after destruction? How do we live with and for the dead? How can we find meaning and redemption in the accidents that define our lives? This chapter, poised at the threshold between innocence and experience, beauty and desolation, introduces every essential element that will define Theo's journey for years to come. Profound loss, the accidental inheritance of something precious, the indissoluble bond between memory and guilt, and the lifelong quest to preserve meaning against the prospects of fate and oblivion. Through vivid details, exquisite pacing, and attentive immersion in the protagonist's consciousness, the text establishes the stakes and terrain of a narrative that will traverse cities, years, and moral divides, all centered on the boy who walks out of disaster carrying with him the fragile, irreplaceable remnant of a destroyed world. Theo Decker's earliest memories are shaded by a persistent anxiety about his mother's safety. As a young child, his mathematical and observational skills are put to use not in play or curiosity, but in calculating her movements and obsessive checking of clocks, counting minutes until her expected return, reinforcing his sense that her presence is the axis around which his world turns. Even tiny deviations from her predictable schedule cause spirals of worrying. If she is late, he physically positions himself by the front door, listening with a canine devotion for the elevator that heralds her arrival. This vigilance is exacerbated by the frequent exposure to media. The local news is a source of chilling inspiration for catastrophic imaginings. Everyday tragedies, violent incidents on the subway, random accidents, medical errors are absorbed by Theo and reimagined as possible fates for his mother. Each headline expands his catalog of nightmares. A mother dropped onto subway tracks, mugged, electrocuted, given the wrong drug, all become haunting possibilities. Underlying this intense attachment is the dysfunction and unpredictability of his father. His father's presence in the household is unreliable at best, marked by emotional volatility and a lack of engagement. The man is often absent, sometimes gone for days. When present, he oscillates between dangerous eruptions and a hungover, apathetic silence at breakfast, his gaze often accusatory and resentful, blaming Theo and his mother for his discontent. Theo's memories of shared time with his father are barren. He notes the absence of ordinary familial participation, no shared meals, no attendance at school functions, no shared activities. The family's primary strategy becomes avoidance. On weekends, Theo and his mother orchestrate their routines to minimize the risk of waking or disturbing the patriarch, measuring their day by his hangovers and muting their own existence within the walls of the apartment. Eventually, his father's unreliability morphs into complete abandonment. One morning, his father simply does not return. At first, both Theo and his mother are untroubled. Such absences are not unprecedented, especially during the college football season when gambling might draw him to Atlantic City. However, when his workplace reports his absence, concern shifts towards the practical. Has he met with violence in some drunken stupor? The answer arrives in the form of a terse, dismissive letter. His father's N.W. life began without them, a phrase so empty and ordinary that its meaning is lost on young Theo. The brevity and casualness of the letter confirms that whatever bond remained has been severed. For Theo and his mother, life with less money, but without the looming threat of his father, is a relief, albeit tinged with loss. Practical adjustments are made. Letting the housekeeper go, tighter budgeting, more modest pleasures. Yet they adapt, becoming a quieter, mutually dependent pair. The emotional consequences of his father's abandonment persist as an undercurrent in Theo's consciousness. While there are concrete hardships, emotional, financial, and logistical inconveniences, the most notable change is the contraction of Theo's world. The photograph of his father is discreetly replaced, their home becomes more truly theirs, and the daily improvisations necessary to make ends meet reinforce a spirit of cooperation and intimacy between Theo and his mother. Against this backdrop, the pivotal day unfolds with grim inevitability. Having survived the catastrophic museum bombing, the event that orbits around much of his subsequent life, Theo walks home, battered physically and emotionally. The city has adopted a crisis aura. Rain falls, radios and strangers murmur rumors about terrorist involvement. The streets teem with nervous, somber crowds. Yet for Theo, the weather and the city's confusion are muted by his own inner turmoil and the singular imperative to return home. The conviction that his mother will be desperate with worry, that her maternal instincts will have sent her in frantic search for him, propels him forward despite exhaustion, headache, and a sense of unreality. Theo's arrival at their apartment is a portrait of numb hope and growing dread. The building, usually bustling, is eerily empty, the familiar staff absent. The silence inside the apartment, the absence of his mother's bag and keys, the lipstick-stained coffee cup abandoned in the kitchen all conspire to unsettle him. Every absent sign of her deepens his panic. Driven by anxious logic, he searches the apartment for his confiscated phone, clinging to the hope that a simple act checking messages, dialing her number will restore order. When these efforts yield only silence, his sense of reality begins to warp. His headache is so intense that ordinary tasks blur into disconnected fragments. As time drags on, waiting becomes an agony of uncertainty. Theo cycles through various rationalizations for her absence, desperately concocting scenarios to explain why she hasn't returned or called. Perhaps she was delayed by transit closures. Perhaps she's helping someone. Perhaps her phone is lost or broken. The rituals of modern family emergency preparedness agreements about meeting at home, leaving messages, calling emergency numbers fail him. These bureaucratic mechanisms offer only procedural reassurances. His phone calls to city agencies amplify his isolation and impotence. The bureaucratic voices on the city's emergency hotline register his situation, but they can neither confirm nor deny, extending only the anodyne hope that further information will be forthcoming. Each interaction is loaded with coded language. The list on which his mother's name does not appear is simultaneously a comfort and a new source of worry. She's not among the dead or the injured is not the same as saying she's safe. While waiting, though his mind drifts over practical concerns and old familial wounds, the absence of extended family support, maternal grandparents are gone. His only living relatives are on his estranged father's side underscores his acute loneliness. Memories of awkward visits with his father's surly father and stepmother are interleaved with the present uncertainty. These relatives are not a potential source of comfort, nor are they practically accessible. In a further attempt to impose order, Theo distracts himself by tending to household trivialities, eating leftovers, washing dishes, cleaning the counter, even tackling a perpetually jammed kitchen drawer. These repetitive, almost ritualistic actions are meant to make the apartment more welcoming for his mother's return, or perhaps simply to pass the time, to create some impression of usefulness in the face of helplessness. Nonetheless, his overwhelming sense of displacement and post-traumatic shock persists. The taste and smell of the bombing dust, blood, the clangor of disaster linger as much in his body as in his memories, an ugly counterpoint to the normalcy he attempts to invoke. Horrors slip by, and the familiarity of the apartment becomes suffused with dread. The news on the television does little to clarify circumstances. Shifting narratives about responsibility for the attack, rising death tolls, and news crew speculation all keep the crisis at a fever pitch. Occasional interviews like the anxious art curator worried about the fate of the museum's masterpieces highlight the broader context of loss. but fail to address Theo's personal catastrophe. He is stranded in a narrative that is public and private, vast and solipsistically contained within his own apartment. The cumulative effect is a surreal, almost feverish distortion of ordinary time and space. Theo, both physically and emotionally wrung out, drifts in and out of sleep on the living room sofa, terrified by every sound, hoping, each time, for his mother's key in the lock. The texture of the night traffic, children coming home, the cycles of evening and night become oppressive in their ordinariness. The first major intrusion into this limbo comes with a phone call from the Department of Child and Family Services. The unexpected and impersonal voice of the social worker slices through Theo's fugue, laced with pre-scripted gentleness that is both alien and unsettling. The abrupt, professional questioning, "Is your father there? May I speak to him?" signals that reality, the external world, has begun to close in, and not to restore order, but to reinforce disaster. The call is administered, not consoling. The social worker refuses to reveal concrete information about Theo's mother, further destabilizing him by requesting to speak with an adult, a parent, a caretaker, roles that are, at that moment, functionally absent in Theo's world. After the call, the weight of the implications presses in on Theo. He sits immobilized, caught in the peculiar tension of hope and dread that those in crisis know well. The ordinary fabric of the apartment, the delicate furnishings, his mother's book and sweater, the childish traces of his own presence are loaded with new significance. The apartment's atmosphere is transformed from a cozy refuge to a cold vacuum, a space thick with things left unfinished, as if all the warmth has been leached away with his mother's absence. As dawn approaches, the city outside yawns toward its routine. Theo speculates on the micro-routines of strangers' mothers brewing coffee, fathers waking their children for school, delivery trucks rumbling through the streets. The contrast between his personal catastrophe and the relentless, indifferent rhythm of the city's awakening is stark. He feels not just lonely, but existentially unmoored, as if he's become invisible in the mechanism of daily life. He oscillates between desperate action and paralyzing despair. He debates calling the police, fearing bureaucratic obstacles, and the stigmas attached to reporting someone missing. He weighs breaking the sacred rule of their disaster plan never to leave the apartment without notice against the gnawing imperative to seek answers. In the end, before he can act on his own initiative, the doorbell rings. The arrival of the strangers is the final rupture. When Theo opens the door, the sight of two unfamiliar adults, average, kindly, anonymous, crystallizes what has been implicit all along. His life, as he has known it, has ended. Their presence is the embodied response of the outside world to his personal tragedy. Their function is to manage, to contain, to redirect. The knowledge floods him, overwhelming hope with a definitive sense of loss. Throughout this traumatic evening and night, patterns emerge that echo throughout Theo's later life: the compulsive repetition of memories, the replaying of events in endless circuits, the attempt to exert control through small domestic routines, the numbed stasis followed by bursts of frantic action. His internal monologue is both self-soothing and tortured, ping-ponging between magical thinking, writing the emergency number down will make everything better, and the inexorable creep of reality. The chapter's events, while circumscribed within the confines of a single evening and night, are laden with emotional intensity. The loss of his mother, first to absence, then to probable death, becomes the central trauma of Theo's life, a wound felt not only in grief for a loved one, but in the destabilization of all meaning and security. The cold visits of bureaucracy and the mechanical voices of the city's support systems reinforce the impersonal nature of suffering within the larger chaos. In parallel to this, the cultural detritus of the apartment are books, half-finished paintings, family photographs. The residue of everyday life stands as a silent witness to the abrupt discontinuity of catastrophe. Theo's meticulous inventory of the apartment's objects is both evidence of his attachment and a symptom of his disordered state. The home is no longer a sanctuary, it is a mausoleum. Moreover, the memory of the girl in the museum, Pippa, flickers as an anchor of hope. She is not merely a survivor, but the one who, with her glance and presence, is perceived to have saved Theo's life. Her existence offers a confused possibility of connection in a world that has become otherwise bereft of meaning. The chapter closes with Theo's recognition that whatever happens next, whether dawn brings news of survival or loss, he is fundamentally alone. The world, in its forms both intimate and official, no longer responds to him as a child bound by parental love, but as a case, a situation to be managed, processed, and moved along. The abyss between the world as he knew it and the world as it now stands has opened wide, and the recovery of any former wholeness appears both impossible and irrelevant. After the catastrophic loss of his mother in a museum bombing, Theo Decker finds himself ensnared in a web of bureaucratic, psychological, and emotional turbulence that upends the familiar contours of his adolescence. The very first moments after the disaster are heavy with numbness and a dissociative haze, encapsulating the profound shock that follows personal tragedy. In the immediate aftermath, social workers, Enrique and a Korean woman whose name Theo struggles to recall, become the arbiters of his fate. They meet with him in a bustling, impersonal Manhattan diner in the dawn hours, attempting to anchor him in a reality he is desperate to reject. Their well-intentioned but clinical words: his mother is dead, her body is at the hospital, he is now a minor without a guardian, collide jarringly with the everyday mundanity around them. Plates of cooling eggs, club kids with smeared makeup nearby, radio music, and promotional posters for health food. What stands out in this encounter is the otherness, the absolute division between Theo's interior devastation and the exterior world's expectation for answers, compliance, and linear facts. He hears the news of his mother's death repeated, the words death and dead hammered at him as if repetition might induce comprehension or acceptance. In this surreal interrogation, the social worker's focus rapidly pivots to his father, demanding practical details to solve a logistical problem. Who will take charge of this suddenly parentless child? Theo's own recollections of his father are threadbare. Memories reduced to a vague last sighting in autumn. No friends or relations to contact, no supporting family network. The depth of his isolation sharpens as the social workers reveal the full implications of his circumstances. He will be removed from his home, his environment, and placed in emergency care until relatives can be found or foster care arrangements made. When the foster care prospect becomes explicit, Theo's anxiety spikes, his mind flits through tabloid horrors of abuse and neglect, and panic threatens to overwhelm him. The workers attempt, with varying degrees of sympathy, to reassure him, to clarify that foster care is only one option, and that alternatives involving friends or family friends could be considered if such exist. Struggling for a lifeline, Theo offers the name and number of Andy Barber, an old friend from elementary school, almost by automatic recollection rather than up-to-date closeness. The social workers latch onto this as a potential interim solution, negotiating with Andy's family and swiftly whisking Theo from the diner to the rarefied world of the Barber's Park Avenue apartment. Arriving at the Barber's home, Theo is swept into an environment of muted privilege and carefully modulated emotion. Mr. Barber, a man with a peculiar, silvery pallor and boyish features despite his white hair, welcomes Theo with a formality tinged with latent unease. Mrs. Barber, elegant, controlled, and exceedingly non-intrusive, offers functional hospitality: a bed, a place to rest, the opportunity to lie down in the room left vacant by Platt, Andy's older brother, currently away at boarding school. She is the epitome of composure, her demeanor so unwavering that it exerts a definite gravity on the disorders around her. The household, for all its comfort, feels museum-like, its interiors heavy with the presence of chinoiserie and the hush of perpetual dusk. Mr. Barber's attempted warmth is quickly revealed as somewhat misplaced. He struggles to connect, offering Theo nightclothes, making awkward gestures of reassurance, even hinting at an illicit nip of alcohol, which he just as quickly dismisses as wholly inappropriate. The real solace comes not from the adults, but from the silence and understanding Andy offers. Rousted from his sleep to meet Theo, Andy says little, but sits in shared stillness, a presence rather than a solution, acknowledging with few words the enormity of his friend's loss. In these days following the bombing, Theo's existence is a continuous negotiation between public exposure and private grief. He is both cared for and set adrift in the Barber household, simultaneously invisible and hypervisible. The apartment is filled with a stream of visitors from social workers, city-provided psychiatrists, and figures from his mother's professional and social circles, to friends, actors, and former neighbors. Each arrives with condolences, stories, or food that Theo is neither hungry for nor receptive to. Mrs. Barber, ever the gatekeeper, monitors these encounters, expertly ending them before they can threaten the fragile equilibrium she constructs for her home and guest. She advocates assertively on Theo's behalf with social services, placing herself strategically between him and bureaucratic intrusion, yet always with a reserve that preserves her household's order above unfettered comfort. While the Barbers do their best to remove traces of tragedy, limiting exposure to news broadcasts, filtering out the morning newspapers to shield Theo from distressing headlines, nothing can truly insulate him from his loss. Andy becomes Theo's main companion during this period, staying home from school and attempting, through chess games and conversation, to provide the comfort of routine without demanding emotional engagement. Their friendship, rooted in shared past marginalization and mutual coping strategies forged during a disorienting academic acceleration into higher grades, is characterized by quiet solidarity rather than demonstrative support. Yet even this refuge is tinged with darkness. Memories of bullying, loneliness, and academic pressures that first brought Theo and Andy together resurface, paralleling Theo's current state of displacement. Andy maintains his immersion in rigorous studies, progressing through Japanese homework and AP science courses, while Theo counts days by the absence of his mother and cycles through endless mental rehearsals of recent family meals and mundane, deeply cherished moments with her. The week is punctuated by large gatherings, a party thrown by the Barbers that cannot be cancelled, and from which Theo and Andy are sequestered with trade dinners and a movie, the sounds of revelry filtering in from the distant, shining living room, a piercing reminder of his outsider status. Even the safe, lamplit gloom of Andy's room is unable to keep out the knowledge that there is no going home. Theo is a permanent guest, unmoored, assailed continuously by memories, guilt, and an almost suffocating longing for his mother that wakes him in the night, leaves him queasy and exhausted by dawn, and renders meals and conversation near impossible. As days pass, the machinery of social services makes another attempt to contact Theo's paternal grandparents. When Mrs. Barber breaks the news that Dorothy, his step-grandmother, is too unwell to take him in and that the best they can offer is to pay for a motel room nearby, an unthinkable makeshift solution, Theo is struck anew by the depth of his abandonment. The overt message is that he is unwanted, a problem to be handed off. Mrs. Barber, with a rare glimmer of sympathy, assures him that it has been decided he will stay with the Barbers for the time being, at least until the end of the school year. Still, Theo's anxiety about his future grows, exacerbated by the sense that whatever arrangements are declared temporary could collapse at any moment, sending him into institutional care or solitary exile. During this period, physical tokens become essential anchors for his unraveling identity. Most notable is the old man's ring, the heavy piece of jewelry handed to him in the moments after the bombing, a ring whose physicality, cool stone and warm gold, provides a tactile reassurance that words and people cannot. Mrs. Barber examines the ring with curiosity, asking about its origins and noting its antiquity, but her interest is more aesthetic than probing. For Theo, the ring is deeply symbolic, a memento of trauma and a clue to an unfinished obligation, yet he avoids sharing the story behind it even as it becomes his talisman. The rhythm of life in the Barber's household is shaped by an endless effort at invisibility. With an army of domestic workers managing everything from plant care to laundry and cleaning, Theo's attempts at helpfulness are either unnecessary or, when they go awry, a cause for mild embarrassment. His outsider status is reinforced by friction with Andy's younger siblings, Kitsy, who resents his intrusion, and Toddy, whose questions about Theo's absent family cut with childlike directness. The environment, for all its luxury and apparent hospitality, remains fraught. Theo feels every request a towel, a pencil sharpener marks him as an intruder. With the imminent packing up and storage of his mother's belongings, Theo is reminded of another pressing concern: the painting he removed from the museum, Carol Fabricius's The Goldfinch. Although the artwork's presence is a distant, Buzzing anxiety, he is aware that steps must be taken to return it, a purpose that sits amid more immediate survival concerns. The first sign that the outside world and the world of consequences is closing in comes with the appearance of investigators at the Barber apartment, their visit deflected by Mrs. Barber due to inconvenient timing. Later, police officers arrive at his school, requesting to interview him. This meeting unfolds in a scene reminiscent of an inquisition, with adults from every arena of Theo's disrupted life, teachers, counselors, social workers, Mrs. Barber herself assembled around a conference table. The inquiry into the bombing is at once clinical and unsettling, with leading questions, memory tests, and floor plans that jumble Theo's recollections and heighten his anxiety. His answers are a mixture of evasions and half-truths, prompted by terror of exposure regarding the painting. But he soon realizes that the interviewers do not suspect him of anything specific. Their focus is on reconstructing the events of the bombing, but to Theo the session is a trial, one cloaked in the institutional facades of concern. Only after much circling do the authorities release him, reminding him to contact them should he remember more. For Theo, the chief revelation is procedural. No one, it seems, has any idea of his secret, nor does anyone understand the extent of his trauma. Through all this, school offers no refuge. His return is marked by embarrassment and discomfort. He is alternately shunned and fussed over by classmates and educators. Normalcy itself is suspect. Every ritual, every familiar smell or sound is heavy with reminders that his mother existed only days before. Tom Cable, once his close friend, distances himself, heightening Theo's sense of isolation and sparking anger. The dual forces of guilt over his mother's death and over Cable's betrayal in their friendship fuel wild, if ultimately unacted on, fantasies of retaliation. The adult world remains relentless in its efforts to corral his grief into therapeutic channels. Counselors urge him to write journals, make colleges, and express himself through breath and craft. But to Theo these interventions are performative, disconnected from the true texture of his loss. Their faith in these mechanisms only amplifies his alienation, framing his numbness as a problematic gap to be assessed, monitored, and if possible, medicated away. Prescription drugs and household expedients, pills from doctors, green tablets from Mrs. Barber compound his sense of unreality. His nights become a fog of suppressed dreams and frustrated awakenings, and his days are heavy with drowsiness, prodded awake by bitter tea and parental exhortations to eat. Even shared meals become a battleground, with endless debates over breakfast routines and minor family quarrels swirling around him like a storm he cannot enter. In the midst of all these systemic and household complications, the narrative pivots inward, uncovering in Theo a drive for connection not just to people, but to meaning and history. Dreams and half-memories surface, where the last instructions of the old man in the museum become critical. Hobart and Blackwell. Ring the green bell. On a quiet Sunday morning, these words jolt Theo from sleep, unlocking in him a sense of both foreboding and purpose. He confirms the name in the telephone directory of business on West 10th Street, its essence unknown but heavy with significance. Despite the uncertainty that plagues him, he resolves to find Hobart and Blackwell to carry out the charge entrusted to him with the ring. The prospect is formidable. The address takes him on a wandering journey downtown, through the Greenwich Village streets, disoriented yet driven. His first attempt to enter the shop is unsuccessful. Its gates are down, its interior dark yet fascinating, a dusty trove of antiquities, its windows revealing an abundance of cast-off treasures. The atmosphere is thick with a sense of both history and eeriness. After an abortive attempt to call, Theo waits until the shop opens, observing from the outside. Eventually, movement inside signals the presence of its proprietor. Following the cryptic instruction given to him, ring the green bell, he discovers a hidden entrance beside the shop, marked only by a strip of green tape. With mounting anxiety, he presses the buzzer. What follows is an encounter edged with both trepidation and the promise of resolution. The door opens to reveal a commanding, though time-worn, figure. Hobie, tall, heavy-set, and exuding both dignity and exhaustion, draped in a paisley robe. When Theo presents the ring, Hobie's guarded demeanor gives way to recognition, and he welcomes Theo inside, marking the beginning of their relationship and the transformation of Theo's fate. Throughout this period, the thread binding all events is the overwhelming presence of grief and the absence of adult understanding. Even acts of kindness, those of Mrs. Barber, Andy, the social workers, are colored by limitation, self-interest, or social utility. The Barbers, for all their resources, cannot offer healing, only a safe holding pattern until bureaucracy or fate decides Theo's next chapter. The clinical organizational interventions of the city reveal only the limits of institutional empathy. Theo's psychological state is compounded by survivor's guilt, the sense of being an interloper in other people's homes and lives, and a profound dissociation from reality. The painting remains the secret core of his identity and trauma, a symbol of irreparable loss and transgressive possession. Meanwhile, practical questions about custody and the future hover unresolved tensions with family, grandparents unwilling to take responsibility, and the persistent, crushing absence of his one true emotional anchor, his mother. Yet, amid this devastation, there is movement, a compelled, hesitant forward motion signified by the quest to find Hobart and Blackwell. It is an odyssey through the city's neighborhoods, and through the labyrinth of his own pain, fueled by the ethereal guidance of memories and riddles. In meeting Hobie, Theo enters a world that will become both a new source of comfort and complication, weaving together his personal tragedy with the mysteries and dangers of the art world, and the adult relationships that will come to define him. In sum, this phase of Theo's life is a slow-motion fall through grief, bureaucracy, and the echoing corridors of memory and remorse. The external world, for all its bustle and well-meaning interventions, can offer him little but sanctuary from immediate harm. The internal world, haunted by dreams, galvanized by the enigmatic charge of the ring, and the painting becomes the true ground of his survival, setting the stage for what will become a twisted journey through beauty, theft, love, and the search for meaning amid chaos and violence. The narrative begins amid the evocative, scented chaos of an antiques workshop, dense with gilded artifacts, the tang of wood oil, and the low light filtering thickly through dust. Theo, the protagonist, young, orphaned, recently traumatized, crosses into this realm shadowed in mourning, as objects press around him, some alive with artful history, some decrepit, broken, or in disrepair. This physical setting, redolent of craftsmanship, death, and the endurance of things, initiates a key relationship in Theo's journey, the one he forges with the antiques restorer, James Hobart, Hobie. Theo arrives uncertain, sensing the stale hush of death in the close air. He is beset by anxiety and loneliness, and as he follows Hobie, observing the restorer's awkward grace and the many traces of loss in the space, he processes his own dislocation. The absence of his mother, the abrupt violence and confusion of her death, and the emotional aftermath of the bombing that killed her in the museum. In this space, Hobie reveals his vulnerability and nervousness, stumbling through social awkwardness while displaying the comfort of a craftsman among his tools and treasures. As they settle into a conversation, one awkward, probing, yet gently paced, Hobie gradually learns of Theo's recent connection with their shared acquaintance, Welty. The old man, as Theo has privately called him, died from his injuries in the same bombing that killed Theo's mother. Hobie's process of uncovering the details is careful, sensitive, tinged with his own mourning, and Theo recognizes in this moment the shared sense of disbelief and hope that a lost loved one might somehow return. Talk turns to the ring entrusted to Theo by Welty, an object, linking the boy with Hobie, Welty, and the larger world of antiques and artistry. Hobie's questions spiral through the specifics of Welty's death, how much pain he may have endured, and the lies people tell themselves about instant death and the impossibility of pain. This conversation, suffused with grief, carries echoes of what Theo's social workers have repeatedly asserted about his own mother's passing, an assertion never challenged or fully believed. Hobie's openness with trauma and loss resonates with Theo, and initiates the atmosphere of mutual understanding that will inform their relationship. Theo is also keen to know about the girl, Pippa, who was with Welty during the bombing. News comes. She has survived, but is grievously injured, and recovering within the same house, tended by Hobie and assisted, intermittently, by a nurse. The discussion, resisting any false optimism, blends candid talk about trauma with practical concern for survival and ongoing care. Hobie discusses the unpredictable physics of disaster, how lives survive, or are abruptly ended for no reason, parallels drawn out with war stories and descriptions of the senseless randomness found in the photographs of Matthew Brady, or the aftermath of old battlefields. Over a meal, as Hobie gently prompts him, Theo lets slip some details about his life before the strained memories of parents, his unpredictable father, the micro-traumas of instability, and his now awkward situation among the affluent, reserved Barber family who have provisionally taken him in. It is a rare, subtly kind adult conversation, free from the psychologizing of social workers or the checklist empathy of strangers. Hobie's responses, hanging between gentle humor and real attention, fold Theo into his world, granting him a kind of provisional intimacy that other psychiatrists or caseworkers have not afforded him. The visit soon shifts to the heart of the household, the sick room, where Pippa lies recuperating. In a room shadowed with hurt and riddled with relics of hope and care, a candle guttering, get-well cards, the faint presence of music, a dog keeping patient vigil, Theo is let in for a few delicate minutes. Pippa's body bears scars and signs of her suffering. Skull fracture, shattered leg, long comatose stretches. Nevertheless, in her fragility, she reveals a keen musical intelligence and a gentle, strange kinship with Theo. The two talk haltingly, exchanging intimate, if childish, facts and memories, favorite composers, fatigue, the odd sense of being lost in one's own life. Pippa expresses both the desire for company and the persistent need for quiet, and Theo finds her presence simultaneously ordinary and mysterious, both soothing and exhilarating in a way unfamiliar even to him. The act of quietly holding Pippa's hand, the comfort it provides to both, and the awareness of a wordless bond in the wake of trauma, profoundly affects Theo. The encounter is marked by a sense of dreamlike unreality, underscored by pain, morphine, and loss, but also by an emerging, haunting sense of love or devotion that colors his memory and emotional state for days after. Returning, Hobie tries to interpret Pippa's shifting mental state. The aftermath of trauma, morphine, and broken memory means she does not always recognize old friends, sometimes growing emotional or confused. This is a new reality for both of them, and Hobie, like Theo, seems both responsible and mournful, determined to do good for Pippa, but doubting his ability to provide what she needs, especially with the looming presence of others, her distant relatives, who may remove her from Hobie's orbit for reasons both legal and perhaps financial. These scenes of intimacy, loss, and kindness remain secret for Theo, as he keeps his visits from the Barbers and the social machinery that surrounds him. At the Barber residence, Theo's withdrawal and then slow appetite for ordinary pleasures, food, companionship, draws both comment and hope. He is drawn into the household in a muted way, sharing meals and everyday talk, but always as a guest, not a native. Psychological intervention is a constant thread in Theo's life, most notably his sessions with Dave, the psychiatrist. These twice-weekly visits are burdensome to him, marked by his dislike of being observed, his discomfort with forced conversation, and his resentment at the relentless attempt to extract feelings from him. Dave tries, gently, to restate that feeling better is not something to be ashamed of, carefully probing for clues about Theo's progress. Theo is unable or unwilling to acknowledge the buried, shifting mix of grief, anger, and longing that defines his days. He is most honest about his experience in his internal narration rather than conversation, reflecting on the irrationality and suddenness of happiness, the contradictory nature of his grief, and the feel of the city's loneliness and resilience as spring thickens into summer. His friendship with Andy Barber, an odd, bookish, emotionally opaque boy, is both solace and strain. Andy tries in his way to console Theo and make space for him in the Barber world, covering for him when he sneaks downtown to visit Hobie and Pippa. Andy's efforts to adapt or endure are often couched in dry, intellectual language, peppered with references to the academic wounding he receives at their private school, and his own methodical planning for an escape via early graduation and the prospect of college. A subsequent visit to Hobie's house is colored by the impending upheaval. Pippa is to leave for Texas soon, to live with her half-aunt Margaret, a forceful, brittle woman sharply drawn between artificial charm and hard certainty. The narrative explores, through muted conversation and flashbacks, the complex tangle of relationships and resentments in the Blackwell family. The divisions wrought by half-blood, inheritance, and marital history, the role of money in defining who belongs and who does not, and the pain of being shuffled between homes as an unwanted or quasi-welcome child. Pippa's ambivalence about her new guardian, her lack of memory, the faint promises of horses and pools in Texas, the sense that she is being moved like a piece of property mirrors Theo's own vulnerability. Both children are displaced, haunted, neither at home nor quite orphaned, and exposed to the arbitrary power of surviving adults. The last days before Pippa's departure are steeped in sorrow and longing. In a hushed, rainy room, she and Theo listen together to a piece of sacred music. The sharing of the iPod's earbud, the mingling of hands, the confession of loneliness, all lead to a brief, stumbling kiss, innocent, fevered, freighted with loss. This moment marks for Theo both the depth of his attachment and the weight of his grief. Her absence leaves him afterward with a sharpened ache and an anxiety that nothing in his new life, neither in the Barber household nor among new guardians, will fill. Her kiss becomes a vivid, painful talisman he carries back uptown, a secret sweetness that sustains and isolates him. The larger setting of the Barber family, with its tangled web of affections and tensions, provides a complicated but fundamentally supportive structure for Theo, at least in the short term. The household is marked by ritual and competition. Miss Barber's coolness and competence, the children's efforts to carve out their positions of affection, Kitsy as the indulged beauty, Toddy as the needy youngest, Platt as the trouble-prone favorite, and Andy's dry narration of the family's preferences and alliances. As Theo becomes more integrated, his passivity and distance diminish somewhat, though he remains aware that his place is tenuous and conditional. The threat of having to go and live with distant grandparents looms over him, a prospect grim enough to cast the Barbers as a sanctuary, even with their peculiarities and internal dramas. A growing friendship with Hobie quickly becomes the core of Theo's existence. He is allowed to learn from the old man by osmosis, assisting in the workshop with small tasks, absorbing lore about woods, finishes, styles, and the subtle, loving restoration of antiques. Hobie becomes not just a mentor but a surrogate parent, a figure of stability, decency, and affection subtly different from the busy, often distracted members of his foster household, or the well-meaning but emotionally generic professionals and social workers assigned to his case. Theo's exposure to the world of antiques brings him a sense of continuity and belonging that is otherwise lacking. The animals lining up for their place in the Noah's Ark on Hobie's shelf become a symbol for the odd, inappropriate things that become most beloved. Those that don't quite fit elsewhere yet, through their incongruity, gain their own preciousness. The furniture in Hobie's workshop is described as alive, creaturely, their personalities and histories discernible in creak, grain, shape, and the warmth of their wood lives longer than human spans, carrying their own scars and stories. This capacity to detect and appreciate the aura of the past mirrors Theo's own longing for connection with his mother, with Pippa, with something beautiful persisting beyond injury and time. As Theo is slowly drawn further into Hobie's world, he is simultaneously beset by guilt and anxiety around the fate of the painting Fabricius's, the Goldfinch, which he has kept hidden in the apartment, unable to figure out how to return it without risk or revelation. The existence of the painting becomes a secret, a source of both dread and comfort, and as time goes by, he becomes paralyzed by the magnitude of his situation. A news article finally brings relief. The masterpiece is presumed destroyed. This grants Theo an unexpected breathing space, a reprieve that enables him to set aside the problem, at least temporarily, even as he recognizes the irrationality of this hope. Events accelerate as Theo's father, absent since before the bombing, abruptly re-enters his life, accompanied by his girlfriend Xandra, a woman whose brashness, raw competence, and contemporary edge represent everything alien and unstable to the world Theo has attempted to piece together since his mother's death. The return is abrupt, awkward, and jarring. Mrs. Barber, caught between social obligation and genuine concern, can only look on helplessly as the disheveled duo whisk Theo into a new, unknown future. The apartment is rapidly dismantled, sold off and shipped west. The world of memory, of smell and sight and comfort, is disassembled with alacrity, leaving Theo doubly orphaned by death, then by departure. The parallel endings, Pippa's move to Texas, Theo's extraction to Las Vegas, are played against the background of adult decisions made without the children's input. governed by legal ties, the requirements of inheritance and insurance, and the inertia of other people's histories. Through all these events, the painting and its fate remain woven into the background, a source of security and dread, hidden and precious yet vaguely dangerous insurance against the uncertainties of life, a link to his lost mother, to beauty, and to the world of hobby and art that draws him so deeply. The paternal reunion is laced with false joviality and old grievances. His father's attempts to justify past behaviors, the complicated involvement of Xandra, the threat of collectors and dubious dealings. Theo is forced quickly to manage the logistics and risks of hiding the painting in the wake of his father's return, knowing that his old secrets will soon be impossible to keep in the uprooted chaos of the move. Farewells are difficult and awkward. Andy, Theo's closest friend, is bluntly realistic about the future, but their relationship is marked with real affection. Neither tries to cheer the other up with platitudes. Hobie, for his part, is gentle and direct, trying not to impose or interrogate, extending unconditional welcome and practical ideas as to how Theo might remain in touch or seek support in hard times. Throughout the chapter, the raw edges of Theo's grief are omnipresent. The adult world offers him little solace as it struggles with its own crises, financial, emotional, familial. He finds a lonely solace in his secret visitations with Hobie and his growing capacity for wordless understanding in the presence of Pippa. Through objects, the ring, the painting, the scent of old wood, the mundane artifacts left behind in his mother's rooms, he finds a bridge between the world of the dead and that of the living. As events reach their climax, a rapid acceleration of loss, packed boxes, last meals, and hasty goodbyes, Theo's emotions remain ambiguous. He is uncertain, guilty, and yet occasionally buoyed by strange pockets of comfort, small pleasures, the unreliable kindness of friends. Amid all this, he clings to his clandestine painting, the one secret he feels he can keep, as he is swept forward into another life. In all, this chapter steeps Theo's coming of age in loss and displacement, resolved not at all, but temporarily by moments of deep, unlikely connection. With Hobie, whose warmth and integrity provide a lifeline through the worst of Theo's grief. With Pippa, whose pain and affection offer solace in the dark valley of trauma. And with art and beauty, whose resilience in the face of destruction shapes both the narrative and Theo's evolving resilience. Every adult in this tapestry is haunted, struggling, yet it is through understated acts of kindness and care for both people and objects, and in the refusal to turn away from pain, that some fragile kind of home is momentarily, if never securely, rebuilt. As the chapter unfolds, Theo is caught in a transitional phase, burdened by the tangible and intangible remnants of his old life. Anxious over the fate of the suitcase containing the precious painting, he finds himself compelled to retrieve it, ostensibly for mundane reasons, but truly out of an undercurrent of anxiety and the impossibility of letting go. The return to his old building is marked by a collision of familiarity and change. Beloved doormen replaced by new, less amiable staff, old rituals interrupted by new regulations. The warmth of Goldie's easy rapport contrasting with Marco V's impersonal suspicions. The gesture of not logging the bag, performed by Goldie and Jose, is an act of quasi-parental protection amid the bureaucratic coldness of the world, allowing Theo to reclaim the suitcase and with it, a link to all he refuses or cannot bear to give up. This minor victory, however, is tinged with grief. The casual banter and affectionate teasing from doormen who have anchored his urban childhood now becomes a kind of informal farewell. The city, so intimately known, is receding. Small, seemingly trivial exchanges are laden with lost Goldie's playful references to bees in Vegas, the request for a photo. Theo's reluctance to voice his sadness reflects the landscape of his post-trauma life, where goodbyes are inherently fraught and connection is something to be covered over or hidden, even as he's compelled to circle back toward it. His journey out of New York is shadowed by more than nostalgia. Practical fears emerge too. The unspoken terror that airport security will discover the hidden painting, or that random adult suspicion will catch him out, pervades his movements. Characters surrounding him, his father, Xandra, strangers are sharply, sometimes harshly, rendered, their gestures and commentary either indifferent or inept. The outward hassle of fitting suitcases and discussing airline fees barely masks the deeper tension of this enforced uprooting. The departure from Mrs. Barber is polite but underwhelming, distinctly adult in tone. Her careful, distancing affection feels like a muted closure to his recent temporary home. Her unemotional goodbyes and perfunctory gratitude for him, as a good guest, contrast against the undertow of his own feelings. Theo is left to nurse private wounds, sadness at Andy's absence, disappointment in the thinness of these brisk adult farewells. On the drive to the airport, Theo's introverted fear is quietly excruciating. Sandwiched between adults whose preoccupation superstitions about flight numbers, coded sexual whispers exclude him, he sits in liminal silence, adrift, overshadowed by the intimacy and collusion between Xandra and his father. Their relationship, with its uneasy blend of eroticism, insularity and carelessness, makes explicit what is only implied in Theo's own displacement. If not for the evidence of recent catastrophe, one might suspect, as Theo himself does, that this parental pair had engineered the disappearance of the past entirely. At the airport, his internal panic reaches a kind of fever pitch. Convinced he will be caught as a smuggler, obsessed with the details of the security screening, hyper-vigilant in a hostile crowd. The bright press of post-crisis America, crowded with guards and weaponed soldiers, evokes the trauma of the recent bombing, and the threat of exposure is both psychological, his secret grief, his burden of the painting and literal, as he almost expects a hand on his shoulder at every turn. Even the half-hearted medicating gesture of Xandra and his father popping tranquilizers, snapping pills feels offhand and ill-advised, a band-aid for wounds neither seen nor understood. The flight to Las Vegas proceeds in a haze, the prescribed pill engendering surreal, near hallucinatory dreams, a swimming contest with Japanese children, a moment of weightless floating detached from all other bodies which mirror Theo's own dislocation from reality, his sense of sliding untethered from the life he has known. The border between dream and waking is blurred, and the violence of the plane's landing only reinforces the jaggedness of his return to so-called reality. Arriving in Vegas, the airport's garish, fever-dream atmosphere amplifies his disorientation. The city is rendered as an alien planet, plastic, bright, faintly menacing. The family retrieves the suitcase, an unremarkable but loaded moment, and step out into the superheated Nevada air. Las Vegas is a revelation. Architectural pastiche, casino grotesquerie, manufactured volcanoes, all image and surface. The drive from the airport to the family's new house enters an ever more surreal suburban sprawl, the emptiness of the setting underscoring Theo's own sense of emptiness. Their chosen neighborhood is the apogee of new American soullessness, cookie-cutter developments named with a forced optimism, canyon shadows, spirit flag, dancing deer villas, empty gestures at community and rootedness. Inside, the house is foreign and sterile, stripped bare, marred by Popper, the dog's mess, and the disarray of careless living. The air heavy with the smells of animal neglect, carpet cleaner, new paint, lost aspiration. The physical emptiness of the home brings into relief the violence of the loss of his mother and of his former life. Not just a different setting, but the intentional erasure of all she loved. Settling into his new bedroom, Theo enacts a private ritual of continuity, unpacking his belongings, hiding the painting high in the closet, surreptitiously taking it out to admire in the desert light. The act of concealment is not just self-protective but an assertion of private meaning against the indifference of the world outside. The Goldfinch's blaze of color and light serves as a spiritual counterpoint to the barrenness around him, a promise of grace within the existential wasteland. The household he has been delivered into is a wasteland in its own way too. His father's entire existence revolves around pills and gambling, with Xandra as his companion in vice. The rhythm of the household is dictated by television, gluttony, chemical highs, and the slow descent into aimlessness. Pill popping replaces the earlier excess of alcohol, and the succession of victories and feats at the casino substitute for any genuine work or home life. Theo's father, no longer the agent of past rages and abuses familiar in New York, is rendered somnolent and emotionally absent, drifting through his days, high on Vicodin or the anticipation of the next win. There's a new affability in the house, a kind of forced truce, lubricated not by love or understanding, but by a shared retreat from the difficulties of life. Theo is acutely aware that the financial circumstances around him are precarious. His father is cagey about his new car, His supposed employment, the endless influx of racetrack and casino paraphernalia, and the growing mountain of unpaid bills makes plain the family's instability. Everything substantive: real jobs, real conversations, real concern has been slowly supplanted by addiction, deception, and a headlong rush away from consequence. The acquisition of new belongings, and the shallow promises of the seductions of the strip, cannot compensate for the lack of family connection or responsibility. Within this vacuum, Xandra emerges as a figure both attractive and alienating. She represents a new sense of the possible, of animal drive and sexual charisma, but also of risk and selfishness. Theo's simultaneous annoyance, fascination, and discomfort around her, his observation of her wardrobe, her routines, the fact that she talks and vents about him rather than to him, exemplifies both the precociousness of his adolescence and the confusion of his new status as neither child nor protege, but little more than an inconvenient house guest. Without community, without a reliable source of affection or stability, Theo drifts. The neighborhood itself is bleak, empty, depopulated, with only scattered, weary neighbors, the playa, and the sense of a growing threat always at the periphery. He finds solace in small rituals: floating in the pool, studying the stars, and in his own acts of rebellion and self-sufficiency. The privileges of his former life, public transportation, the amenities of New York, are notably absent, and the tight, comforting strictures of the barber's household feel irretrievably lost. His school, populated by the children of itinerant managers, contractors, and immigrants, is similarly transient and rootless. Theo, beset by homesickness, finds partial refuge in books, especially his honors English assignment, Walden. Thoreau's pronouncements on spiritual and material emptiness, though mocked by his classmates, chime with the reality of Theo's own situation and his longing for meaning amidst a backdrop of despair. It is here, in the borderlands of exile, that he meets Boris, an equally lost yet excessive spirit, the child of a peripatetic Ukrainian miner, born in Australia, raised in a host of strange lands, and as displaced as Theo himself. Their initial meeting is shaped by bravado and mutual teasing, rooted in cultural misunderstanding and the quick establishment of a subcultural rapport. Boris, with his wild hair, scrawny frame, battered clothes, and razor-edged humor, instantly signals himself as both outsider and veteran survivor. His inventory of countries lived in and languages spoken is a badge of resourcefulness, resilience, and danger. As their friendship develops, Boris becomes a mirror and a foil to Theo. His attitudes toward the world, laughing off deprivation, romanticizing violence, deeply skeptical of belonging, both echo and trouble Theo's own. Boris's life stories of accidental deaths, sexual exploits, brushes with criminality, and spiritual conversions are at once sobering and intoxicating. The desperation, humor, and fatalism of his upbringing, his brief forays into Islam for belonging, his intimacy with poverty and violence, his improvisational resourcefulness show Theo the spectrum of possible survival strategies in a world indifferent to childhood. Their relationship is anchored as much in need as in choice. Both are emotionally and physically abandoned by their parents, dependent on each other for kinship, food, and distraction. They quickly become a domestic pair, shopping, cooking, dividing chores, sharing cigarettes, and crucially, learning the ways of mild criminality as a form of empowerment rather than just necessity. The sharing of theft, the exchange of war stories, the pooling of knowledge, words, curse phrases, recipes, is both an education and a defense against loneliness. Their adventures in theft, foraging for groceries at the supermarket, learning to appropriate the excesses of the American economy, emphasize the amorality bred by abandonment and the opportunities created by the impersonal abundance of Las Vegas consumerism. Theo, despite initial apprehension, is quickly pressed into service as lookout and assistant, discovering the rush and camaraderie of minor criminal success. This counterfeit family is joined by Xandra's dog Popper, nicknamed Popchick, or even Amla and Snaps, who becomes not just a mascot but a symbol of their fellow feeling. Popper's eager dependency and desperate affection echo Theo's own. In caring for him, both boys enact a tender ersatz responsibility they receive in turn from no one else. The holidays approach, revealing both the lacerations of loss and the makeshift attempts at joy. Exiled from any authentic celebration, Boris and Theo cobbled together their own rituals, stealing vodka, feasting on scavenged or purchased food, sharing in the warmth of their ragtag domesticity. Letters from the distant past, rare missives from Hobie, news of the city, sympathetic recollections are lifelines of connection to memory, and reminders of all that has been lost. Amidst their camaraderie, the darkness of Boris's home life reveals itself. His father, absent-hued and unpredictable, looms as both threat and object of pity. Conversations over school-made black eyes and vodka recount beatings, the intermittent generosity of a parent's apology, and the bruising culture of silent understanding. Boris's own narrative is colored by violence, his father's, his own attempted retaliation, the normalization of bruises and hardship. The cycle of trauma is experienced as both misery and destiny, an inevitability that is endured, mocked, and finally survived in the company of a true friend. In a narrative marked by lacerating honesty, the chapter depicts episodes of drunkenness, violence, recovery, and play. Together, Boris and Theo careen between despair and euphoria, exploring the tension between self-destruction and the desperate reach for joy. Their wrestling matches, insults, and brawls in the pool and kitchen are both comic and tragic, symbolic rehearsals for a life where physical pain is at least comprehensible and, for a while, reversible. Amid all this, longing persists. For home, for the memory of a mother now permanently absent, for the laughter and clutter of the barber's home, for the predictability and wisdom of Hobie's. Theo's grief emerges not in therapeutic confession, but in night terrors, sudden fits of sobbing, moments of panic that Boris, unperturbed, accepts and soothes with the same matter-of-fact comfort he applies to hunger, bruises, or loneliness. Their mutual solace, found in late-night cigarettes, drinking, talking, and play-acting, is what allows each to keep going, to transform desperation into fantasy, to escape being crushed. Their relationship, in its intensity, fuses the boundaries of brotherhood, friendship, rivalry, and partnership. The bond is essential rather than sentimental. Neither boy has the time, language, or inclination for elegy. Their survival depends on action, on the present, on the next adventure, or the next joke. Together in the abandoned playground, under the enormous Nevada sky, they find fleeting comfort in the old music of shared language, reciting childhood songs and inventing new traditions. As Christmas approaches, the ragtag household attempts a semblance of belonging, despite its artificiality and the extravagance that stems from a gambling windfall. The meal on the strip is a moment of genuine happiness. For a single night, the boundaries between family and improvisation, between past and present, seem to blur. Even the most wounded participant's father, stepmother, friend, orphan are caught up in the euphoria of abundance and performance. The time is rendered mythic, outside the calendar or clock, a temporary suspension of doom. And yet, beneath it all, the painting remains a silent, dangerous secret, an embodiment of all that is beautiful, lost, and necessary. For Theo, its presence is both a promise and a threat, tying him to the world of loss and possibility, memory and consequence, from which he cannot escape. Its light, glimmering even in the arid landscapes of his exile, tempers the bleakness with the shimmer of meaning. Throughout, the chapter advances the novel's central themes: dislocation, secrecy, the improvisation of family, the anatomy of trauma through a kaleidoscope of incidents, the everyday negotiations of adolescence, the high and lows of poverty, addiction, and friendship, and the redemptive capacity of shared experience. Action and conversation, abandonment and alliance, loss and resilience, all compress into this season of exile, shaping both Theo's character and the direction his life will take. By its close, the world remains impermanent and precarious, but no longer wholly empty. In Boris, Theo finds the possibility of endurance, if not salvation, a shared capacity to absorb and transform loss, to find laughter and connection in the ruins. The haunted spaces of the empty development and the echoing silences of night offer up, against all odds, not just sights of pain but the possibility of belonging, if only for a little while. And in the presence of the painting, the dog, the friend, the reflection of a life that has been violently shattered, Theo carries forward both the curse and the promise of survival, holding tight to what cannot quite be lost. Theo's life in Las Vegas unfolds in a relentless, sun-bleached rhythm, bleary mornings dimly distinguished from their nights, colorless seasons marked only by the burning nostrils and parched throats that never relent in the desert. Days pass in a bacchanal of adolescent recklessness and escapist camaraderie. Vodka, glue, and weed, afternoons by the pool, malnourishment offset by the tart sweetness of chewable vitamins from the school nurse. Boris, ever the anarchic and affectionate force in Theo's life, is both anchor and instigator. Over the course of a year, their symbiosis intensifies, addictive and almost telepathic, a closeness punctuated by teasing, shared inside jokes, and evenings perched on the threshold of sleep and intoxication, the boy and his dog Popper forming a loose family with Boris. But with Theo's 15th birthday shadowed in the rearview mirror, the dynamic shifts when Boris encounters Kotku. Kotku, really Kylie or Kaylee Hutchins, becomes the chaotic node around which Boris's attention and emotional energy spiral. She is small and sharp, older by years, but possessed of an edgy, brittle adolescence. Her presence is both magnetic and disquieting. Her arrival is met with warnings from Theo's classmate Hadley, who derides her as trash and labels her a promiscuous threat. For Theo, these rumors are less concerning than the reality that Boris, once a constant, drifts away weekends and evenings given over to Kotku, leaving Theo to cobble together interim forms of belonging among classmates, swim team gatherings, and impersonal stoner crowds. Boris is entranced by Kotku's vulnerability, her size, her bordering on anorexia fragility, her claim to wisdom forged through pain, and her need for protection from Mike, her violent older boyfriend. Yet their whirlwind intimacy is volatile, sustained by jealousy and possessiveness, abetted by substances and tempestuous arguments, their fights as passionate as their reconciliations. Boris lavishes Kotku with adoration, but his devotion, baffling to Theo, does not dim his aggressive loyalty to their friendship, nor does it alter the rough, ambiguous physicality that sometimes passes between the two boys' nights spent half-dressed, arms draped or entangled, whispered comfort following nightmare terrors, lines of intimacy blurring in ways that both do and don't feel strange. Theo is adrift in loneliness when Boris is away, haunted by yearning for the messy, impulsive presence that colored his new life. He flails through the loneliness. Late-night pornography, tedium with the books assigned at school, glue-sniffing solo, stumbling attendance at parties given by kids he barely knows. At school, Theo drifts further, his life a kind of muted waiting, for Boris to return, for something to fracture or coalesce. Boris, for his part, is unmoved by the charms of other girls, notably Safi Kasperson, well-liked and beautiful, of whom Theo is half-abashedly envious. Boris, instead, values the camaraderie and wildness he shares with Kotku, dismissing straight-edged girls as lacking the dangerous shared recklessness that binds him to Theo and by extension to Kotku. As Boris becomes absorbed into Kotku's world, Theo takes increasingly contained delight in the small acts of independence and delinquency they share. Petty theft, reckless highs, afternoons of music and laughter, escape from the watchful eyes of their guardians. Still, the atmosphere at home is complicated. Xandra, his father's girlfriend, drinks and isolates herself. His father's presence in the house grows, but stability is an illusion. Football season brings his father manic energy and preoccupation with gambling, sports betting explained as a science, wins and losses tallied with self-aggrandizing bravado, and mentions of astrology and the elusive edge that separates sentiment from outcome. Sun in Scorpio versus Cancer crab, player forecasts and transits. Sundays become a pattern. Hopeful highs, greasy snacks, abrupt mood drops, a chilling autumnal dusk echoing Theo's unease about impermanence. Underneath, anxiety throbs about missing money, about social worker visits, about art and the reality of the painting he still hides, stolen and cocooned behind his bed's headboard. The Goldfinch painting remains a talisman, both physical and psychic. Theo's only consistent contact with his mother's memory, the painting's smallness and solidity offer comfort, its existence tied by chance to survival and loss, its history shadowed by disaster, randomness, and endurance. Yet the painting's official status is murky, risky even to research online, given the threat of being found out as the one who possesses it. Beneath the rhythms of adolescent diversion, loss and instability throb in Theo's family. His father's efforts at connection are sometimes sincere, long, heartfelt confessions over dinners about missed years and regrets, a plan to set up a savings account for Theo, but always undermined by self-interest and unpredictability. As gambling luck falters, cracks surface, Boris warns Theo that his father loses money fast, far more than he admits. Boris's and Kotku's relationship turns public, both their passionate affection and their combative bickering, fueled by adolescent jealousy and unresolved pasts. Boris, paranoid and possessive, tracks her movements even as he reassures himself of her loyalty. Meanwhile, a more tangible threat emerges. Naman Silver, a debt collector, comes calling in search of Theo's father, his visit a study in affable menace. Theo is caught off guard, forced to navigate the adult language of points and obligations that hover just outside his comprehension. After Silver's visit, Boris's own troubles pale in significance. He is angry about Kotku, about the casual way others see them, about classmate gossip, but unable to maintain the anger when the realities facing Theo come into focus. Mounting debts, the risk of violence, and the strain of holding everything together. Events unravel. Boris's emotional elasticity begins to show strain as he splits his time awkwardly between Theo and Kotku, even as he experiences dangerous highs through their charged relationship and through drugs. Simultaneously, the link between Theo and his father grows taut, on the surface amiable but beneath, increasingly edged with expectation and silent resentment. Theo's father's gambling has left him indebted to people like Silver, and the remembrance of family heirlooms stolen before the move festers alongside the relief at brief moments of warmth. Bills come due, literally and metaphorically. After an episode in which Theo is coerced through violence and threats by his father to facilitate a fraudulent transfer of funds from his late mother's estate, the situation's gravity asserts itself with full weight. The attempt fails. The lawyer, Mr. Bracegirdle, cannot and will not authorize a self-serving transfer. He catches the unexplained request to access the account, as well as other attempts at financial fraud perpetrated in Theo's name. The protections Theo's mother put in place work, barely, but the outcome is ugly. His father is exposed both to his son and himself as a man who would harm and use him, a bumbling addict whose tears and violence intermingle. In the aftermath, Boris confesses his own bad news. His father is leaving for Australia and then on to Russia, and Boris intends to run away. Does Theo want to join him? On the tail end of a hallucinogenic night, epic in its childish ecstasy and ephemeral in its promise, Theo agrees. But the city, in reality, closes in quickly. The next day, Naman Silver and his goon reappear, baseball bat and all, issuing one last threat over the unpaid debt. Fear forces Theo to confront the fragility of his domestic arrangements. His status as minor means he is prey to state care, child services, being dumped without recourse. Suddenly, everything collapses. News arrives. Theo's father, returning from an aborted meeting with Silver, has been killed in a car accident, drunk at the wheel. The house fills with Xandra's friends, grief and drugs alike. The shock stuns Theo. His father, always a stormy and erratic presence, is now abruptly and absolutely gone. Boris remains with Theo through the days of the night, an anchor as the unknown future looms. There are frantic, practical matters to confront. What to do with the money and drugs found in Xandra's effects. The temptation to take whatever can be carried is strong, driven by the need to escape before child services or law enforcement appear. Theo and Boris strip the house of cash, relics, and what remains of his mother's jewelry. As they plot their next moves, fissures form in their partnership. Boris wants to wait for Kotku, hesitates over leaving. Theo's desperation pushes him toward flight, his school blazer and painting stuffed away, ready for the road. Tensions erupt between them. Boris hints at a revelation he won't make, something urgent he never says. When the moment for departure comes, they part awkwardly. Boris's misplaced bravado gives way to a fragile, parting affection. Kisses for Theo, a promise to meet up in New York, followed by a gentle retreat into the Nevada night. Theo's journey is fraught with practical and existential danger. Disguised as a runaway, hiding Popper in a shopping bag, shuttled between the bus station, wary cab drivers, and Greyhound's restrictions on unaccompanied minors, He manages in a fog of fever and exhaustion to traverse the continent nearly unseen. Every leg of the journey is a negotiation, staving off suspicion, orchestrating Popper's concealment, bribing the help of drivers, enduring bus transfers and layovers across the American heartland. The trip is passage through pain, memory, geography. United by a shared sense of threat, other passengers on the bus, a sympathetic driver, a silent little girl, a wisecracking conductress, become faded fixtures in the blur of utilities and stops Salt Lake, Denver, Kansas City, St. Louis, Buffalo, Syracuse, New York. As the journey unfolds, Theo's ties to Las Vegas, already tenuous, are sloughed off in fever dreams. Loss, shame, and determination coalesce as he leaves one life behind and stumbles with hope and dread toward another. Arriving back in New York, the city is not the refuge Theo imagined, but a daunting labyrinth. His dreams of returning to the barber's vanish instantly when Mr. Lee, barber, encountered by chance on the street, is cold and unwelcoming, his own mental health apparently frayed, and Theo is rebuffed. Brief moments of hope, friendly strangers, a helpful bus driver, street vendors are always tempered by reminders of vulnerability and risk. The indifference of the authorities, a near assault in Central Park, the gnaw of fever and hunger. Home finds Theo at last, but not the home he expected. He makes his way to Hobie's shop. Hobie and Pippa, now older, changed, receive him, and the parlor is once again a sanctuary. Soup, concern, admonishments to call Xandra. In the warmth of Hobie's embrace, Theo dissolves in tears and finally allows himself to mourn. The call to Xandra is final, resentful, bleak. She wants information. She wants to be rid of Theo with as little inconvenience as possible, asking for an address only out of self-preservation. Accusations about the thefts and losses, family heirlooms taken, are batted back and forth with mutual bitterness. Neither party holds much love or forgiveness for the other. The long shadow of Larry Decker's failure stretches over both. As Theo falls exhausted into sleep at Hobie's, the chapter closes on a sense of liminality. Past and present touch in fevered dreams, the cords of trauma and inheritance still twisted tight, the future uncertain. Amidst shame, fear, and anger, there remains the hard-won comfort of sanctuary and a fragile thread of hope in art, in memory, in connection to others, however hard and tangled. Through this tumultuous stretch, the motifs of the painting return and fade, beauty surviving disaster, protection amid chaos, and fate's random alchemy. In every shifting, state-drunken revel, panic-stricken flight, and moments of comfort, Theo is shaped by the objects and people he carries forward, wounded and unfinished, but surviving. The narrative opens with Theo awakening in an unfamiliar yet hauntingly familiar setting, overwhelmed by disorientation, physical discomfort, and acute awareness of the passage of time. The traces of domestic life, burnt wood in the fireplace, dried potpourri, hints of varnish are interwoven with his sense of loss and estrangement. These tactile details embody the duality of safety and impermanence, and Theo's actions, checking his hidden pillowcase under the bed, stumbling through his hygiene routine, capture his ongoing vigilance, and in the compulsion to safeguard the one secret, the painting, that ties his fate to both personal memory and criminal consequence. Theo's first encounter this morning is with Hobie, the kindly, absent-minded antiques restorer who had become, by circumstance and affection, a guardian figure for him. The breakfast scene encapsulates Theo's fragility, embarrassed by his illness, wrestling with feelings of unworthiness, and anxious about his uncertain status in Hobie's home. Hobie's pragmatic affection is shown in simple gestures: pouring tea, making oatmeal, offering a seat at the table. Underlying the ordinary domesticity is a subtext of profound loss, referenced obliquely through Cosmo's absence, the departed dog, and the shadow of Welty, Hobie's former partner, whose death is intermingled with the trauma of the museum bombing. Hobie attempts comfort through practical reassurance, but the textures of loss are too fresh for Theo, and their conversation meanders into the fraught territory of Theo's family abandonment. The dialogue exposes layers of relational brokenness. Theo narrates his grandfather's cold indifference, his father's alienated upbringing, and by extension, the pattern of intergenerational disconnect. Hobie, ever cautious, is attentive but not invasive, promising support and presence while minimizing the boy's fear of being displaced again. Into this heavy, uncertain morning enters Pippa, vibrant and alive, her very presence a jolt of color against the tattered backdrop of Theo's inner landscape. Her interaction with Popchick, the small dog rescued from Vegas, is animated and childlike, and her conversation with Theo meanders from mundane details, dog breeds, street scenes, into the shared territory of survival and mutual recognition. Theo, ever aware of his own rawness, is unable to fully engage, yet Pippa's easy warmth acts as a counterbalance to his anxiety, briefly shifting attention from sorrow to simple pleasures and fleeting connection. Yet illness keeps Theo largely bedridden, drifting in and out of fevered dreams and memories that blur the boundaries of time and place. His mind cycles through scenes from the past. Vegas, the Port Authority, the memory of his painting imperiled, his attachment to objects and people impermanent and insecure. The house where he finds himself now is suffused with associations: Welty's voice, the saturated brown of the walls, the safety of the room mingled with the threat that his secret, the painting, ever present in its pillowcase under the bed, will be discovered or lost. During these long hours, Pippa reappears intermittently, sometimes intrusive, sometimes kind, offering small gifts and origami frog conversation, the promise of music acting as both caretaker and echo of Theo's unresolved feelings, especially regarding shared trauma. The subtext of their exchanges doomed love, mutual incompleteness, memories of the bombing runs through the dialogue. Between moments of isolation, Hobie's steady, domestic presence serves as an anchor for Theo, who attributes to him both the qualities of a caregiver and the threat of accidental exposure. The fear that someone will touch or find out about the hidden painting creates an undercurrent of anxiety that colors every interaction. Theo vacillates between trust and secrecy even as he muses over telling Hobie about the painting. The dread of consequence and the complexity of their arrangement prevent confession. The painting, symbol of Theo's link to his mother and to violence, centers the inner drama. It is both a precious last connection and a criminal liability. Meanwhile, threads of contact with the outside world persist in digital detritus. Abrupt text messages from Boris, Theo's best friend and partner in misadventures, now drifting in Vegas with a cohort from their troubled past. Boris's erratic communication is a reminder of the chaos left behind, and his noise, exuberance, and distance underscore the loneliness of Theo's new existence. The abrupt cessation of contact, Boris disappearing again into the tumult of Vegas, signals the further peeling away of old certainties. Theo's practical circumstances are reshaped through interactions with Mr. Bracegirdle, his mother's financial advisor and quasi-legal counsel. If Hobie embodies safety and home, Bracegirdle is the voice of institutional authority, a gatekeeper hovering over Theo's prospects and future. In their phone conversation and subsequent meeting, the mechanics of guardianship, inheritance, and schooling are negotiated with flurries of gentle but unmistakable pressure. The choices laid out: boarding school, city life, the specter of further displacement underscore the precariousness of Theo's newfound haven. Behind every logistical decision lies the larger question of Theo's belonging and identity, his own wishes set against the plans and hopes adults held for him. The emotional tone of this interregnum is complicated by loss and guilt. News of his father's death, while intellectually understood, is not yet emotionally real for Theo. His feverish illness and dreams are haunted by the need to connect, to repair the irreparable. He vacillates between relief and remorse. Had he failed his father? Could he have prevented the death with the funds that, as it turns out, were technically available? These questions bind together threads of abandonment, responsibility, and survivor's guilt, the psychological debris left by both the bombing and the more ordinary tragedies of family dysfunction. Pippa's visit brings a fleeting renewal of connection, yet it is brief. She departs for Switzerland, for boarding school in a psychiatric institution. Her casual dismissal of the place as a school for loonies, and the undercurrents of her social and medical marginalization echo Theo's own sense of exile. Their farewell is marked by abruptness and unfulfilled longing. The passing presence of Pippa deepens Theo's sense of emptiness once she's gone. Her absence and the traces she leaves behind, her scent, her belongings, her photographs, become objects of yearning, a proxy for lost stability and unreachable affection. Amid this shifting terrain, Hobie and Theo settle into a domestic pattern marked by quiet routines, the slow rhythm of antique restoration, shopping, and communal meals. The contrast with Theo's previous experiences, his chaotic, hungry nights in Vegas. The formality and discomfort of the Barber household are palpable. Hobie's home exudes disorderly kindness and acceptance, a bailiwick where time ambles in small rituals. Dinners, market shopping, old books, offer solace. Hobie's eccentricities, forgetting glasses, mislaying tools become part of a reassuring pattern. Not every relationship is so easy. Despite outward comfort, Theo's life with Hobie is still beset by internal anxiety. The presence of the painting is a constant weight, generating elaborate scenarios of discovery and ruin. Theo's efforts to hide and preserve it become daily rituals that border on compulsion, as does his need to maintain secrecy from Hobie and Mr.'s bracegirdle. Nighttime anxieties over the possibility of accidental discovery keep his nerves in high alert. Hospitality and communal experiences with Hobie's circle of friends offer a gently distracting counterpoint to Theo's fears. The conversations he observes Hobie trading stories with Mrs. DeFries, reminiscing about Welty's warmth and the ethos of their shop, reveal a culture of matchmaking and gentle guidance, finding the right home for each object and person. The narrative draws subtle connections between this ethos and Theo's own precarious quest for home, a place or person in which to find belonging and restoration. Theo's foray into academic self-discipline is initially a distraction, then a penance. Shutting himself in his lamplit room, he devotes himself to exam preparation with punishing rigor, using work as an anesthetic and as a gesture of restitution both towards himself and his mother. The difficulty of his studies becomes a metaphor for his internal struggle. The harder he works, the more obscure and hopeless things become, echoing his sense of shame and unworthiness, a struggle compounded by the knowledge that failure will once more strip away the little stability he has found. His achievements, if any, are tinged with dread. When he finally sits for the entrance tests, the experience is colored by the challenge of institutional procedures, the stress of high-stakes competition, and the gnawing fear that success or failure will irrevocably alter the course of his life. The outside world, meanwhile, persists in threatening the fragile cocoon that Hobie's world has offered. News headlines announce the recovery of other paintings stolen during the bombing, unleashing in Theo a new wave of terror. The discovery that incompetent, impulsive criminals managed to smuggle, store, and nearly destroy priceless works, paintings hidden in attics, wrapped in tinfoil, implicated in charges against the unwitting and guilty alike, intensifies the sense that his own secret is precarious and dangerous. The article's closing lines, referencing other art still missing, probably here in the city right under our noses, strike home. For Theo, these words feel like a direct threat, an omen. The investigation's expanding scope, FBI, Interpol, the sense that the net is tightening fosters panic, and the thought that Hobie could become implicated because he unwittingly harbored the painting, and Theo, torments him afresh. His fears compound. Not only is he personally at risk, but any misstep could draw down calamity on those who care for him. Public discussion of the crime, especially among Hobie's friends, is both a relief and a torment. The dinner table conversation with the Amstices pivots on the shock and callous opportunism of the theft, the vulnerability of the wounded, mingled with reminiscence and trivial grievances. In these circles, the art theft is notorious. The recovered Rembrandt becomes an index of the painting's importance, and for Theo, the incommensurate threat it poses. Unable to confide in anyone, unreleased from his load of guilt and anxiety, Theo turns to self-medication, taking painkillers filched from Xandra. The drugs promise oblivion but also symbolize the deep syndicate of pain, avoidance, and yearning that drives him. As he drifts on the edge of sleep and consciousness, he clings to what slim comfort he finds in statistics about art theft, hoping that anonymity, not innocence, might preserve him. Within this complex interpersonal and psychological lattice, the elemental themes of the story surface in ever-shifting forms. Loss and survival. Theo's emotional anchors, his mother, his father, Pippa, are absent or inaccessible, making survival an act of endurance and improvisation. The painting is both a relic and a burden, a token of love and trauma whose fate determines, in Theo's mind, the moral valence of his own actions. guilt and redemption. Haunted by the events he could not control and those he might have, Theo parses his memories and presents actions for signs of redemption or disaster. His belief in his own responsibility for his father's death, his sense of failing his mother, his fear of betraying Hobie all feed into a compulsive need for atonement that finds temporary outlet in overwork and chronic anxiety. Identity and dislocation. Theo's multiple stand-ins. Hobie, Mr. Bad, Bracegirdle, the memory of his mother, Boris, Pippa, are insufficient for true belonging, as is any one domestic setting. His constant oscillation between the ordinary and the catastrophic, the legitimate and the criminal, reflects a fundamentally fractured identity. Boarding schools, guardianship arrangements, and temporary homes reinforce the sense of displacement. The persistence of beauty and art. The painting, a masterpiece impossible to integrate into common life, is the story's axis, a repository of memory, grief, and hope, and an ever-present source of risk. Theo's connection to it supersedes rational calculation. It is an emblem of something unspoiled amidst violence and loss, yet its continued possession is a source of continuous jeopardy. Adult and institutional authority. Figures like Hobie and Mr. D. Bracegirdle embody contrasting forms of adult intervention, nurturing versus procedural, permissive versus corrective. Both filter and channel the possibilities open to Theo, but neither can provide resolution for his internal disarray. The institutional settings of school, guardianship meetings, and the legal discourse of inheritance are inadequate to address the deeper currents of trauma and yearning. Peer relationships and isolation. Friendships, most prominently with Boris and Pippa, are fragmented by distance, circumstance, and personal change. Boris's absence intensifies Theo's sense of separation from his past, and from the parts of himself linked to impulsiveness and rebellion. Pippa's own exile to a psychiatric boarding school reflects the commonality of damage among survivors, as well as the limitations of even the closest emotional connections. Each character is segregated by trauma, each improvising survival in private, sometimes overlapping trajectories. Ritual and reassurance. The routines and rituals of Hobie's home meals, art, restoration offer the possibility of healing, but cannot fully counteract the forces of anxiety and guilt that structure Theo's everyday existence. Antiques, meals, and music serve as touchstones, offering a comfort that is always slightly insecure, always shadowed by the threat of exposure and loss. Precarious security and the threat of exposure. Throughout this period, every apparent safety carries a shadow risk. Theo's hope that the authorities will not discover the painting so long as it is not moved or sold coexists uneasily with the mounting evidence that the world is searching in earnest for what he possesses. The safety of home is undermined by the knowledge that its foundation is contaminated by Theo's hidden crime. Memory as sanctuary and burden. Theo occupies his own living museum rooms filled with the traces of the dead and the living, objects imbued with stories and memory. He is both caretaker of these remnants and their prisoner. What comforts also constricts, reminding him that the past cannot be fully mourned or left behind. In sum, this phase of Theo's life is defined by stillness and volatility, a pause between disasters in which the real work of healing, mourning, forgiveness, connection remains tortuously incomplete. The themes of fortune and misfortune, inheritance and exile, restoration and ruin are played out both in interpersonal dynamics and in Theo's relationship to the painting and his own sense of self. The story at this point is unsparing in its exploration of instability, the terror of discovery, the ache of missing those no longer present, the impossibility of reconciliation with the past, the longing for comfort and redemption entwined with the inevitability of loss. Every small act, cleaning, cramming for exams, sharing a meal, becomes a battleground between despair and hope, shame and acceptance. The domestic drama, the mounting pressure of law enforcement, social expectations, and private grief, all combine to propel Theo onward, battered but not entirely lost, reaching for some justification, some inner or outer evidence that beauty and love endure, even as all else changes. In this period, Theo's relationships with Pippa and Hobie are clarified and complicated. With Pippa, a near impossible romantic hope, her physical absence, the medical and emotional barriers, and the solace he takes in her left-behind possessions, all reinforce the intensity and futility of his longing. With Hobie, the steady routine and effective warmth of their daily life contrasts with Theo's chronic expectation that disaster is imminent, the dread that, at any moment, benevolence could switch to betrayal or loss. With Mr. Bracegirdle, the institutional note is struck. Decisions are made and unmade, options laid out and constricted. With every mechanism, guardianship, school, finance insufficient to answer the real need for love, continuity, and forgiveness. Theo's internal voice is restless, insightful, wry, and acutely self-lacerating, caught between the necessity of hiding and the longing to be known. Life at Hobie's offers temporary solace, a slow, healing rhythm, but always just beyond the threshold is the reality of the missing painting, the danger of exposure, and the sense that catastrophe remains only a step away. Externally, the world's attention to the crime and its aftermath grows. Newspaper headlines, newly discovered caches of art, law enforcement comments, all make it clear that the past cannot be safely buried. If the rest of the world is searching, the noose is tightening. The walls of Hobie's sanctuary, for all their density and warmth, are porous. Yet, for the time being, the simple rituals of safety, repair, and quiet companionship persist. In its way, the life inside the brownstone becomes a form of resistance against chaos, loss, and oblivion, though always under threat. The hope for some permanent reprieve remains out of reach, but within this interlude, Theo finds moments of beauty and kindness that, however transient, allow continuation. The painting remains central, symbol of the persistence of beauty, the indivisibility of loss and love, and the impossibility of returning stolen things, whether objects, people, or innocence, to their rightful place. Theo's story, and the chapter chronicling this unsettled stage of it, is one of stillness before the next storm, of a wounded heart making temporary peace with the world, always fearing but never fully succumbing to the darkness that follows loss. During this sequence of the narrative, the protagonist navigates a period of profound emotional numbness and isolation in the aftermath of his acceptance into an early college program in New York City. Despite what should have been a moment of triumph, the arrival of an acceptance letter, and an enthusiastic celebration with those who care for him, he feels overwhelmed and unmoved, weighed down by ongoing anxiety, especially relating to his possession of the stolen painting. The chapter opens with hesitation and anxiety as the protagonist receives his college acceptance. Rather than elation or relief, the news triggers avoidance. The envelope sits in his drawer for days before he can bring himself to announce it to Hobie, the antiques restorer with whom he lives. Hobie's warmth and pride only underscore the disconnect the protagonist feels. His emotional landscape is bleak, and he finds himself repelled by the celebrations and compliments. He cannot access any genuine happiness or satisfaction. His pleasure centers seem irreparably dulled by trauma and loss. Even as those around him express joy and anticipation for his future, he perceives their voices as distant, their congratulations as burdensome reminders of his inability to connect or engage. Upon starting at the early college's school with a reputation for academic freedom and a lack of rigid requirements, he finds the environment unexpectedly undemanding. Instead of using this opportunity for exploration or personal growth, he does the bare minimum, taking the smallest allowed course load: studio art, French, intro to European cinema, and Russian literature in translation. The flexible environment, free of strict grading and rigid curricula, instead feels alienating. He drifts through classes and assignments without interest or investment, maintaining only the most minimal of engagements, both academic and social. His daily routine is unvaried and empty. Mornings begin with mundane rituals, fragments of memory attached to objects and spaces in Hobie's home, echoes of Pippa's presence, and the comforting but unreal sense of belonging. After perfunctory interactions with classmates, a cohort mostly unattainable to him, either due to age, naivety, or their own cloistered optimism, he returns home, rarely mustering any interest in the various clubs, societies, or extracurriculars his counselor or teachers encourage him to join. Disconnection becomes a motif, not only from his new environment, but also from the students, who seem insulated from the kinds of hurt and experience that now define his reality. Their concerns are academic and suburban, untouched by the sort of personal catastrophe that has marked his adolescence. The social chasm is unbridgeable. He moves through the early college as a silent outsider, the curriculum and the social life both irrelevant to the deeper struggle occupying his mind, the theft of the painting, his grief, and lingering trauma. Occasionally, faculty members take notice of him, identifying potential through his writing and inviting him to more engaging or life-affirming experiences. But these overtures are rebuffed. His resistance is not due to a calculated antisocial stance, but to a pervasive exhaustion and detachment. The enthusiasm of his teachers, initially palpable, fades as he fails to rise to academic or social expectations. The sense of being a fraud or imposter worms its way into his thoughts. He suspects that his entry into the school was not earned but owed to the tragedy, a special exception granted to the traumatized child, an act of institutional pity rather than merit. He imagines displacing another deserving student, further compounding his survivor's guilt and cementing the sense that he doesn't belong, could never truly belong, regardless of circumstance. That is reflected in the teacher's subsequent disappointment and the increasingly mute, negative commentary in his progress reports, none of which reach an attentive parent or guardian. His slide into apathy is unchecked and unchallenged. Outside the formal structure of the school, he takes refuge in the basement workshop of Hobie's antique shop, where the endless silent hours spent restoring furniture offer a balm if not healing, then at least oblivion. There, enveloped in the rhythmic activity of woodworking, the smell of polish and old wood, and Hobie's gentle, unspoken companionship, he finds a kind of temporary peace. These moments in the shop are marked by a sense of tacit understanding and sympathetic attention, something unusually nurturing given his history of loss and orphanhood. There is a comforting formality to his relationship with Hobie, a distance that feels safe but not cold, a routine that insulates him from exterior demands and the noise of the city. The gestures of trust and apprenticeship, the rituals of restoration and patination, become small acts of anchoring in an otherwise chaotic and bereft life. Throughout, the protagonist remains hypervigilant about security and the safety of the painting. Daily routines are punctuated by anxiety spikes, unexpected doorbells, noises, or absences trigger fearful reactions. His research into laws on art theft yields little clarity, but plenty of dread. The painting itself represents both a source of crushing anxiety and a precious secret, a link to his lost mother and his fragmented sense of self. At the same time, the memory of Boris, the wild and charismatic friend from his past, flickers at the edges of his consciousness. He notes that his current life, circumscribed and dreamlike, is light years away from their sensational, lawless existence in Vegas. School readings in Russian literature, the geography of certain New York neighborhoods, or the encounter with Russian acquaintances, like Grisha, the Russian Jew who works moving furniture with Hobie's shop, all bring Boris and the past crashing back to the present, highlighting the distance between what once was and what now is, a grown-up world of stifled possibilities, responsibilities, and muted hope. The absence of Boris and the unlikelihood of reconnecting is a source of sorrow. His cult-like influence and promise of adventure and chaos serve as both a temptation and a reminder of irrevocable loss. Equally sharp at times is the memory of the protagonist's father. Encounters around New York, especially in seedy or transient neighborhoods, evoke a sense of nostalgia and displacement as he revisits restaurants and haunts that meant something to his father. Sharing these places with Hobie is awkward. He realizes that these touchstones are personal, and the impulse to recreate moments of comfort or familial connection is complex, often unsuccessful. Practical concerns, like his living situation, also come to the fore as school authorities raise questions about housing. The informal arrangement with Hobie is technically temporary, a liminal space that cannot serve as a permanent solution in the eyes of administrators or social workers. The idea of living in a school dormitory is terrifying. The lack of privacy, the exposure, the impossibility of securing his secret cargo all make this prospect unbearable. His anxiety about security and privacy is so intense it borders on paranoia, underlining his fundamental sense of unsafety everywhere. In an effort to make himself indispensable and guarantee his place in Hobie's employ and household, he throws himself into chores and restoration work. The painstaking process of rehabilitating antiques, of aging wood with plausible signs of history, of repairing what time and misuse have damaged, all these activities serve as metaphors for his own internal restoration, even as he believes himself irreparable. Hobie's lessons contain both craft and wisdom. The small dramas of furniture repair offer fleeting gratification and structure in a world otherwise lacking both. Time slips by almost without notice. The outside world recedes as his existence contracts to the twin poles of the workshop and his school obligations. Books and furniture become his companions. The rhythm of the days becomes a narcotic, and while interactions with Hobie stay warmly distant, the underlying sense of fragility persists. The chapter describes Hobie's views on furniture, his disdain for shortcuts, his advice to honor the future restorer, his dislike of anything epoxy-glued, which doubles as a larger lesson about endurance, patience, and the morality of restoration versus destruction. Interspersed with these routines are incidents that reawaken his anxiety. Media coverage of art crime and the severe sentences handed to a ring of art thieves fail to reassure him. Instead, they serve as constant reminders of the risks and dangers that still hang over him. The narrative describes a narrowly averted disaster when a fire caused by mice chewing electrical wires nearly destroys part of the house, bringing into sharp focus the potential vulnerability of his cache. Subsequent scares like finding Hobie in his room, unannounced, leave him jumpy and distressed, his nerves perpetually on edge. Amid these worries, a solution presents itself after a series of conversations with Grisha, one of Hobie's moving crew. Grisha's musings on art storage, a business rife with secrets, lost treasures, and hidden dangers, illustrate the shadowy underbelly of the art world. During an errand to a vast storage facility in Brooklyn, the protagonist learns about the practicalities and the anonymity afforded by these institutions. Here, illegal objects could easily disappear. The facility is portrayed as eerie and lifeless, a neutral space housing the forgotten, the valuable, and the dangerous alike, untouched by sentiment or oversight. Prompted by this, the protagonist decides to move the painting to a more secure and anonymous location. Resorting to the classified ads and the offerings of various storage options throughout the city, he selects an inconspicuous, large chain self-storage facility. The process is chillingly easy. No questions asked, cash accepted, anonymity assured. The painting, transferred in a pup tent bag and paid up for years in advance, is safely hidden. The protagonist experiences an uncharacteristic moment of euphoria after this, relieved perhaps of a fraction of his anxiety now that the painting is less obviously tethered to him. This release compels him to revisit his old neighborhood, possibly in an unconscious search for connection to a pre-trauma self, or to touchstones of his lost family and childhood. What he finds there, however, is devastation. The building is gutted, the familiar faces gone, the community dissolved in the name of development and progress. The realization that these last links to his memories and family have been erased delivers a blow as painful as any overt act of violence. The city, resilient and indifferent, devours history, memory, and the fragile sense of belonging. The emptiness left behind is total. The protagonist is left to confront the finality of loss, the dissolution of his last bastions of nostalgia and continuity. The world, once charged with familiarity and latent promise, is now a place of perpetual falling, an unending descent beyond reach of rescue or return. Throughout the chapter, the protagonist's experience is defined by isolation, anxiety, and an inability to find comfort or meaning in either the opportunities or the connections available to him. He moves in a liminal space between childhood and adulthood, past and present, security and exposure, seeking solace in routine and craftsmanship, but unable to reforge the ties of family or friendship that might offer sustenance. The city around him shifts and recedes, as do the people from his past. The only constants, the secret he guards and the pain it brings. Restoration, in its many guises, remains tantalizingly out of reach. Over the span of these pages, the narrative enters a mature phase of Theo's life in New York, 8 years after his abrupt exit from the barber's world and the tumult of adolescence. Structured through episodes rich with memory, confrontation and interiority. The story begins with a jarring chance encounter on the city streets, unfurls through a sequence of emotionally charged meetings, probes old wounds, and ultimately exposes a tangle of criminal, ethical, and personal reckonings that propagate around Theo's secret fate, his possession of the Goldfinch, of having lived so long in the shadow of trauma and deception. The chapter opens as Theo, newly returned from running a bank errand, is apprehended by a man whose aspect he nearly fails to recognize: Platt Barber, his old adolescent nemesis. Instead of the bullish, proud jock Theo knew in his youth, Platt now presents as a man prematurely worn, his privilege dampened with regret, his face haunted, his manner anxious. Their conversation, stilted and awkward at first, forces Theo into the news that Andy, his closest childhood friend, and Mr. Barber, the family patriarch, are dead, having drowned in a boating accident for which Platt feels responsible. The gravity of this revelation in public, amidst New York's spring bustle, is destabilizing, as memory opens up old bonds, missed phone calls, opportunities for reconnection long wasted. Platt discloses a family narrative sharply at odds with the gilded Barber facade. Barber's history of profound mental illness, scandalous disarray in young adulthood, periodic institutionalizations, and a legacy of family trauma orbiting the water drowning in more than one generation, obsessions with the sea, disastrous choices made with fatal consequences. Their conversation loops through shared recollections of Mr. Barber's enthrallment with the ocean, his emotional volatility, his periods of grandiosity and breakdown, and the pressures on the children growing up under the shadow of his unpredictable moods. Grief sits between them like a third person. Platt's spontaneous confession, his bitterness about being packed off to various indifferent schools, a misshapen shoulder from an accident no one cared to notice, the loneliness of being the least favored child mixed with memories of what a terror he was to Andy. Abuse recounted without self-justification but plainly, almost in atonement. The chilling stories of his cruel pranks on Andy surface, unvarnished, and Theo cannot reassure him, knowing too well the truth of them. This acknowledgement of sibling cruelty points both to the cycles of familial violence and neglect, and to the strange chemistry of love and harm that persists in their world. At Platt's urging, Theo is brought back, swept by the undertow of melancholy and surprise, into the Barber household. Crossing the threshold is like entering a perfectly preserved diorama of his youth. All the same porcelain, paintings, lamps, and furniture, except for new signs of entropy, disuse, and loss. Instead of the formal living room, Mrs. Barber receives guests in her pastel-drenched bedroom, surrounded by signs of retreat and a growing isolation. She is at once proud, overwhelmed by loss, and vibrantly herself, bemusedly chiding her dogs, inviting Theo close, insisting on reminiscences about Andy and her late husband, and yearning for social connection even in her withdrawal from the world. She describes Andy's adult life, his engagement to Miyako, his MIT fellowship facts Theo knew only dimly through mutual acquaintances. The presence of her tiny Yorkshire Terriers, gifts after the funeral, signal both a newfound comfort and the hard reality of change. No more allergies, no more Andy. Sparked by nostalgia, Mrs. Barber speaks warmly of Theo's eye for art when he was a boy, his quick discernment of her best piece's artistic perception as a bond that had always set him apart from her own children. Kitsy and Toddy, now grown, hover on the periphery of this gathering. Kitsy's beauty has matured into something almost intimidating. Vast chasms of time and change have passed, yet old family dynamics surface with subtle force, unspooling a sense that Theo has re-entered a home that is simultaneously familiar and irreversibly altered. After the visit, Theo wanders the city, spring's renewal tainted for him by the recurring trauma of his mother's death and the spectral presence of Andy's absence. He mentally clutches at the signs and memories of his lost friend, feeling both guilt and despair at never having called, just as with his mother. These deaths, his mother's, Andy's, have become moral touchstones, exposing the distances he has allowed to grow between himself and the people who once anchored him. This stretch of narrative segues into the central conflict of Theo's adult life, his role as the de facto manager and partner in Hobie's antique shop. The partnership is more than business. It roots him in Hobie's unlikely, gentle household, gives him purpose, an illusion of belonging. Yet underpinning this is a growing anxiety, the risk-laden artifice at the heart of their recent bounty. Theo, though knowledgeable about antiques, has veered into deception, selling changeling piece, cannily constructed, altered, or outright faked antiques, crafted with loving skill by Hobie, but never intended to deceive, passing them off as authentic period masterpieces to wealthy clients lacking expertise. The scheme is lucrative but dangerous, both legally and morally, as Theo manipulates confidence, provenance, and the collector's own desire for bargains or hidden treasure. Theo has developed a suite of psychological tactics, exploiting the malleability of value in the antiques trade, touching on the desire for prestige, the fantasy of connoisseurship, and buyer's greed, all while keeping his mentor Hobie shielded from the truth of what the business has become. The pressure peaks when Lucius Reeve, a particularly savvy and unpleasant client, realizes he's been sold a fake, refuses a buyback, a device Theo has used successfully in the past to legitimize provenance and pacify complaints, and begins to threaten exposure. Reeve, suspecting that the antique forgeries are part of a larger fraud, draws Hobie into the line of fire, intensifying Theo's dread and sense of impending disaster. Against this backdrop, Theo's loneliness and alienation are laid bare. His romantic life is scattered with casual and unfulfilling affairs, his true longing fixed on the unattainable Pippa, now living in London with another man. Her brief recent visit with her boyfriend is agony for Theo, rekindling old obsession, jealousy, and a sense of estrangement from the world of normal relationships. Pippa remains a ghost, a living reminder of trauma and lost possibility, a symbol of the irreplaceable bond he felt in the crucible moments after the museum bombing. This longing is rendered all the more acute by the self-knowledge that even with his other liaisons, prettier, more conventional women, he remains untouched, always rehearsing for the presence of someone who will never reciprocate his depth of feeling. His drug use is woven with clinical precision into the story's fabric. What began as desperate self-medication to quiet anxieties and traumatic memories has calcified into a controlled but persistent habit involving painkillers and, occasionally, street drugs. He prides himself on balancing his addiction, organizing his use to remain functional, a high-performing, sharply dressed salesman while privately writhing under the weight of withdrawal, depression, or craving. Narrated with unflinching clarity, this cycle is marked by intrusion of intrusive thoughts, horror at the shallowness and futility of life, dread of the ordinary sufferings that await everyone, and recurring images of neglect and loss, his old dog Popchick as a symbol of innocent need, forgotten and at risk. In his private struggle to quit, Theo sets up elaborate plans, preparations, and taper schedules, though he inevitably falters. Even when he's physically at his lowest, plagued by the sickness and mental stuff, warned about by other addicts, he is tormented more by existential nausea, grief, and an aversion to the human predicament than by bodily discomfort. His guilt mixes inwards, becoming a generalized aversion to humanity, procreation, the cycles of hope and disappointment that mark every life. His contact with the Barbers, reignited by Platt and cemented by Kitsy's invitation to dinner, roots Theo again in their odd, now diminished household. The dinner occasion is both a comfort and a confrontation. He is welcomed with warmth by Toddy, now Todd, who credits Theo's presence in his childhood as the impetus for his own vocational ambitions in social work and helping others. Kitsy, too, emerges from the past no longer a child, but a startlingly beautiful woman, brittle and affected by loss. The family has changed. Mrs. Barber is frailer, Kitsy is withdrawn on antidepressants and a leave from Wellesley, and the sense that trauma has bent but not broken these survivors pervades the evening. In this home-like gathering, Theo is both a guest and a ghost, haunted by Andy's role as lost brother and by his own place as outsider-insider. Afterwards, Theo is again consumed with thoughts of the painting's fate. He visits the storage locker, a space he has avoided for years except for the grim necessity of paying rent. The Goldfinch, mummified in plastic and tape, is now mostly a phantasm, a source of terror, nostalgia, and the dread of being caught. Seeing it provokes a delirium of memory and moral confusion. The notion of keeping or ever having stolen it has become alien to him, yet he cannot let it go. The painting, initially a source of solace and comfort, has become a symbol of all the ways his life has diverged from any recognizable norm. Parallel to this is ongoing fallout from his criminal activities as a dealer. As he weathers withdrawal superficially blamed on the flu, he is distracted from the anxiety about Reeve only by the intensification of depression and the need to work and keep up appearances. When Hobie mentions, in passing, messages from Daisy and from Reeve, as well as Kitsy reaching out to him, Theo is forced to juggle his mounting crises. Platt proposes an under-the-table arrangement selling family antiques from their clutter of storage. Theo, ever adaptable, offers cash and suggests a backdated bill of sale to cover the provenance needed for Reeve, thus implicating Platt as a source. This transactional moment is tinged with relief and cynicism. The machinery of small deceptions has become routine, even as the stakes spiral ever higher. The confrontation with Lucius Reeve, set in a noisy, youthful restaurant Theo selects to unsettle his adversary, lifts the chapter into the threatened sphere of exposure. Reeve, keen and menacing, draws the conversation quickly from the supposedly disputed furniture to the core secret, the stolen painting. He has deduced or suspects that Theo was the boy who walked out of Gallery 32 after the chaos of the museum bombing, carrying the artwork. He accuses both Theo and, by extension, Hobie of fencing the painting, exploiting it as collateral for black market dealings, and points to a recent news article describing an attempted bust of an art and drug syndicate in Miami where the Goldfinch was rumored to have been used as collateral. Although the painting itself was not recovered, this is sufficient ammunition for Reeve's threats. He offers to buy it from Theo, seeing preservation as a convenient moral pretext, but also threatening to ruin Theo and Hobie's reputations by contacting law enforcement agencies. Theo, momentarily terrified, gamely deflects and laughs off the allegations, placing himself in the tradition of the mob, deny, 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 leveraging his real ignorance of the Miami connection, a fake Goldfinch perhaps, and the absurdity of the rumor. Reeve, deflated but unappeased, leaves the door open for further pressure. Theo leaves the meeting shaken, plagued by thoughts of withdrawal and legal peril, but also by the realization that the legends swirling around the missing painting now have a momentum of their own, independent of his possessiveness. As Theo processes the danger, he contemplates turning himself into Hobie, at least about the real scope of the antique fraud. The resulting confession is painful but cathartic. Hobie responds with wounded disappointment, but also measured understanding, emphasizing that as owner and senior partner, he too is culpable for having let Theo run the business unchecked. Hobie's focus narrows to practicalities: buy back the pieces, right the wrongs, accept financial loss, and protect the honor of their shop. In private, Theo knows that the scale of the fraud is larger than he admits, and the money won't cover the damage. But he hopes ignorance and the complexity of the antiques world will keep their clients at bay. After this, the narrative narrows into Theo's private world of anxiety and watchfulness. He resists at least for now confiding in Hobie about the painting itself, protecting both of them in the face of the law. The city's dangers seem to impinge. A shadowy stranger outside his window might be real or imagined, and every disturbance is freighted with paranoia. The art world's myth-making continues without him. Frames hung empty, articles in newspapers, documentaries speculating on the Goldfinch's fate, official versions safely misplaced from his actual actions. In history's narrative, Theo was only knocked out in a neighboring gallery, not an active participant in the theft. He is comforted and simultaneously unnerved by the barbers' re-entry into his life, their familial health, frailty, and willingness to include him as one of their own. The conversations with Platt and Kitsy, and the trusted housekeeper Etta, provide a tenuous thread to the world of connection and loyalty, an alternative to terminal secrecy and isolation. Finally, the narrative returns to the theme of concealment. The Goldfinch painting, still sealed in plastic in a storage locker, remains a living presence both in Theo's mind and in the secret networks of the art world. Its survival is discussed, speculated upon, eulogized by experts. Its reality as an object possessed by Theo is both overwhelming and deeply disorienting. He realizes, in a moment of shame and clarity, that whatever good the painting once did him as a symbol of beauty, memory, or lost love has long since been poisoned by his inability to return it, his passivity, his willingness to keep it shut away from the world. Both the story's broadest stakes, the looming possibility of criminal exposure, the loss of loved ones, the inexorable tide of time and mortality, and its most intimate ones, the ache of unrequited love, the temptations and failures of addiction, the desperate, guilty wish for connection in the midst of guilt and moral compromise, are entwined through the chapter. The world of antiques, art, and crime merges seamlessly with the world of family, trauma, and longing, and out of this duality emerges the deeper question of Theo's adulthood. Whether it is possible, having suffered so many losses and committed so many errors, to redeem oneself or recover beauty, hope, or a sense of home. Underneath all, the painting stands as a symbol of everything lost and desperately preserved, a memory of love, of childhood, of the miraculous in the midst of devastation, a beautiful thing that has survived disaster more than once, but whose power to save or heal is finally indeterminate. Theo's fate, personally and symbolically, remains unsettled on the threshold between concealment and confession, exile and return, holding on and letting go. Theo finds himself caught in the swirl of wedding preparations with Kitsy, a process that is both distracting and disorienting. While selecting apartment registries and dining with Kitsy, he is irked by the ritual of choosing wedding china and her lack of enthusiasm for the sentimental value behind objects, such as the emerald earrings belonging to his mother. This commercialized process, amid stifling crowds and the hyper-cheerful assistance of salespeople, leaves Theo ill at ease, haunted by the emotional residue of his childhood, a time shaped by loss, transience, and trauma. Hobie, who shares Theo's sensitivity to the history within inanimate things, offers encouragement regarding the apartment hunt, but the sense of ominousness persists, colored by Theo's memories and grief. The narrative pivots to Theo's growing relationship with Kitsy. Their romance unfolds swiftly after rekindling at the barber's, building on years of shared childhood experience. The bond is practical, full of convivial dinners and summer adventures, with Kitsy inviting Theo into her social world. While trying to move on from his consuming, unrequited love for Pippa, a love hopelessly entangled with the loss of his mother, Theo rationalizes that Kitsy's presence is a healthy progression. He hopes in marrying Kitsy, supported by Hobie's reassurances about the union of opposites, he can close the door on his long-standing emotional turmoil. Yet, the supposed perfect engagement is roiled by Theo's underlying unease. The pace of social obligations, the parade of wedding events, and Kitsy's increasing involvement with friends leave Theo drained and anxious. Ongoing preparations, expectations about registering gifts and planning the honeymoon, underpin a mounting anxiety. Even the happiness he brings to Mrs. Barber is a source of guilt and dread, especially as the truth of his illicit business dealings and the threat of exposure closes in. Theo is especially haunted by the prospect that any revelation of his fraud might devastate Kitsy and her mother, especially in light of the family's diminished circumstances after Mr. Barber's financial missteps. Meanwhile, Theo's secret is under shadow. Lucius Reeve, a dissatisfied and possibly dangerous antiques client, steps up his campaign of harassment, sending ambiguous but threatening notes to both Theo and Hobie. Reeve suggests a fraudulent scheme involving planting fakes with an elderly woman, seeking to enlist Theo and Hobie in further criminality. Hobie, appalled, keeps the note as leverage should the matter turn uglier. Theo's anxiety accelerates as Reeve's persistence and the threat of legal exposure mount. This pressure is compounded by surveillance around Hobie's shop. Grisha, an employee, warns Theo of unknown men, some possibly ex-police or private investigators lingering around, asking for Theo specifically. The possibility of police surveillance or an impending crackdown looms, breeding paranoia. Under Grisha's scrutiny, Theo tries to maintain composure, all the while conscious of the risk that every day brings closer the moment his frauds will be uncovered, dragging Hobie into the scandal. Stressed by these layers of threat and personal dissatisfaction, Theo cancels his evening with Kitsy and instead wanders into the city, teetering on the verge of seeking drugs from former contacts. Theo, struggling with his addiction, contemplates buying pills or street drugs, but after a series of unsuccessful attempts to contact a dealer, he drifts into the nightlife of St. Mark's. There, he has a chance encounter with Boris, his old friend and partner in youthful delinquency and excess. The spontaneous reunion is emotional and vivid. Boris is older, shrewder, and involved in complex, international business, accompanied by a striking associate named Miriam. Their bond, forged in the crucible of Las Vegas during adolescence, is reunited with affection and an undercurrent of their old chaos. Their night out evokes their history-shared jokes, the peculiar intimacy of their friendship, the psychic wounds of both their upbringings, and the nostalgia and destructiveness of their adolescence. Boris, energetic and irreverent, plunges Theo into his world of Russian clubs, vodka-fueled carousing, stories of criminal enterprise and absurd capers, and later, a night-long circuit through clubs, parties, and a bleak after-hours bar. There, as their mutual inhibitions are stripped away by drugs and drink, their conversation turns to the past. Boris recounts his foray into drug dealing after Theo's abrupt departure from Las Vegas, explaining his relationships with Xandra, his own loneliness, and innumerable misadventures as a youth. Through these tales, Boris demonstrates both his resourcefulness and his capacity for survival, mapping the diverse criminal enterprises and transgressive experiences, deception, violence, and vulnerability that have shaped his adult life. As the hours tick by, under the influence of drugs and nostalgia, Boris makes an unexpected confession. He tells Theo that, years ago in Las Vegas, he swapped the priceless painting, the Goldfinch, for a decoy, leaving a workbook, carefully packaged to the same size and weight, in the place where Theo had lovingly hidden the real painting. Theo, who has hoarded the decoy for years believing he had protected the original, reels at this news. The emotional devastation is immense. The painting, which represented his mother, his trauma, his salvation, is gone, and he never realized it. Boris's confession is at once an apology and a defense. He explains that he took the painting both to protect it and out of desire. In his worldview, chance makes the thief. He never intended to sell the artwork outright, but used it as a kind of capital in the illicit underground economy, barter for goods, a form of credit in dangerous circles. The painting changed hands through a continent-spanning web of art crime, ransom, and criminal bargaining, possibly in Germany, Belgium, or the Netherlands. Boris traces a network of European contacts, dealers, junkies, and criminals in which the painting has become currency and symbol, both a source of immense profit and a perilous liability. The sense of betrayal Theo feels is equaled only by his self-loathing. He realizes how deeply he had identified with his secret possession of the painting, making it the axis of his being. He is bereft, and although Boris attempts to reassure him, even promising his help in recovering the painting, the damage is done. Theo's carefully constructed inner life collapses. The painting is gone, and he is forced to confront the hollowness of his years of secrecy and self-justification. Theo returns home shattered, racked by self-recrimination and withdrawal. The next morning he tears open the package that he has, for years, believed contained the Goldfinch, and finds only Boris's doodle-covered civics workbook. The devastation is total, yet paradoxically, the loss offers a dark absolution. He is, unwittingly, free of the painting's burden and the criminal liability it brought. Hobie returns from an auction in high spirits, pleased to hear of Theo's reunion with Boris, and oblivious to the psychic crisis that has befallen Theo. Conversation is fragmented as Theo is preoccupied by the absence of Popper, Hobie's dog, who has spent the day with Boris. After torturous hours, Popper is returned, unharmed, by Boris, bringing a brief but fraught reconciliation. Their conversation is subdued, Boris regretful, Theo accusatory, and unmoored by the loss of the painting. Boris is cryptic but promises to continue looking for the Goldfinch, piecing together information from his criminal network to locate the current holder or contact. Later, Theo struggles through his day, exhausted and demoralized, but presents a facade of composure as he meets with Mrs. Barber. He gifts her an exhibition catalog, printmaking in the age of Rembrandt, which triggers a conversation that evokes the past, Andy's suffering and personality, the injustices he endured at school, and Miss Barber's maternal regret. The conversation is tinged with the same sense of loss, fragility, and impermanence that Theo feels throughout the narrative. Images from Dutch art vanitas compositions, Memento Mori, the looming symbolism of clocks interweave to evoke mortality, memory, and the inescapable passing of time. Kitsy is delayed, offering vague excuses via text message, and Theo makes polite conversation with the barbers, sensing undercurrents of evasion about Kitsy's whereabouts and the family's emotional weather. The theme of secrecy, absence, and the partitions people construct to avoid pain continues paralleling Theo's own lifelong habit of concealment. In the days that follow, Theo is kept afloat only by the busyness of work and social engagements, which also serve to numb his grief and forestall introspection. Eventually, Boris approaches again, inviting Theo to accompany him on a visit to Horst, a German contact, as they attempt to trace the painting's path through the labyrinthine world of illicit art dealings. Their journey takes them to a dilapidated townhouse owned by Horst's family. There they encounter a hodgepodge of addicts, drifters, and art world outcast people living on the margins, surrounded by relics of beauty and ruin. In conversation, Horst explains the fraught transmission of the painting through various hands, its circuitous journey as collateral and object of desire. The group debates the technical genius of Fabricius, the playful trickery of trompe l'oeil, and the transcendent capacity of art to defy mortality. Horst's Circle is a tragic gallery of the displaced, the story of the Goldfinch's trafficking echoing their own cycles of hope, addiction, loss, and the hunger for beauty. Throughout these exchanges, Boris and Horst discuss the fate of the painting, its possible presence in Ireland, the hazards of tracking it through treacherous networks, and the unreliability of informants and criminals. The network of trust and betrayal, the intricate codes of criminal and artistic commerce mirror Theo's own existential predicament, caught between honesty and fraud, belonging and alienation, love and betrayal. Horst reflects on the emotional meaning of art, particularly the Goldfinch, its hold on memory, childhood, and the enduring human longing for unspoiled beauty. In the background, the devastated lives of addicts and failed artists bear silent witness to the cost of yearning for transcendence in a broken age. Back in the city, Theo's crisis remains unresolved. The painting is lost. The legal threats loom. His personal relationships are full of unspeakables and evasions. The connections he forges with Kitsy, with the barbers, with Hobie, even with Boris, are mediated by secrets, omissions, and the hope of redemption through love or beauty. Yet the losses he sustains contend with the possibility of some rescue through self-knowledge, through courage, through the capacity to act rightly even when all seems lost. This section of Theo's journey is thus one of reckoning, with the ghosts of the past, the debts of the present, and the shadowy promise that, out of darkness and confusion, some thread of meaning and perhaps restoration will yet emerge. The hazards of love, friendship, and art are manifold, but so too are their consolations. For now, Theo remains suspended between grief and hope, compulsion and choice, haunted by what has vanished and what may still be salvaged from the wreckage. The passage opens in the aftermath of a tense episode in a townhouse in the city, where Theo and Boris have witnessed the near-fatal overdose of a young man among a group of transient, drug-using youths. The atmosphere is rough and chaotic. Behind faded tapestries, the room is filled with weary, half-awake bodies, various accents and languages mingling with groans and orders for quiet. Theo is momentarily paralyzed by the sight of the boy's labored breathing and the routine, disinterested response of the adults present: Horst, the host and dubious art-world figure, and a blonde woman who seems experienced in triage. Boris, with streetwise urgency, propels Theo out of the house, brushing off the overdose as a common occurrence among Horst's wealthy and reckless clientele. These are not the truly destitute, Boris asserts. The circle here is made up of rich kids, privileged and protected even as they dabble in the dangerous world of drugs, crime, and art trafficking. Outside, the city is slick and glistening in the aftermath of rain, the darkness relieved by moist little pockets of artificial light. Boris, always in motion, calls for a car across the park and assures Theo that, bad as it looked, the overdose is likely to be managed efficiently. Narcan, given by an in-house nurse, will work as well or better than a trip to the ER, and with less risk of confrontation with judgmental authorities. Boris's pragmatic view is rooted in years of hard experience, both as a survivor and as someone immersed in the underworld. He is more comfortable handling crises among friends than bringing in official help. As they stride briskly across sodden footpaths and empty city benches, Boris reflects on the network at the heart of the ongoing art theft scandal. Horst, a perennial fixer of the high-end European demi-monde, and siblings Ulrika and Sasha, both with complicated pasts and ambiguous loyalties. Boris's theory is that Sasha orchestrated the theft that led to the disappearance of the painting The Legendary Goldfinch. He suspects Sasha set Boris up with a crude shill named Terry, a recent ex-con with shady connections in Antwerp, to facilitate the exchange and keep the proceeds. However, Boris, streetwise and relentless, is already moving to track down leads through his contact, Cherry, a man with ears to the ground in the European criminal networks. Boris explains to Theo that valuable art like the Goldfinch can be shuffled endlessly as black market currency traded for cash, goods, drugs, even people, but never safely sold or displayed, since it is far too recognizable. Theo listens, anxious and haunted by the fate of the painting, despairing at the thought of it rotting in a restaurant storeroom, as the rumor suggests. Boris, ever the survivor, insists he'll sort it out. Their relationship by now balances mutual need and long-standing history. Boris is both Theo's most dangerous friend and his most reliable ally in crisis. From there, the narrative drifts into Theo's mental fog as he walks the cleared streets. He considers retreating to Kitsy's apartment, drawn by its anonymity and the safe, impersonal cheerfulness of her order-girl food, modern furniture, the fleeting security of a place where no one can find him. However, upon arriving, he is coldly rebuffed by Emily, Kitsy's roommate, who refuses him entry on the grounds that he cannot expect to come and go as he pleases. This rejection, while irritating, also somehow cheers him. He basks briefly in the validation of his own negative impressions of M, Kitsy's perennially unsympathetic childhood friend. Almost immediately after, fate delivers a catastrophic blow. Theo, standing outside the florist, catches a glimpse of Kitsy herself, locked in intimate solace with Tom Cable, her former lover, his old classmate, a lingering presence from their adolescence. What Theo witnesses is gentle and heartbreaking. Kitsy leans into Tom's side in the snowy streetlight, her grief and affection unmistakable, a soft kiss exchanged, and, most shocking of all, the sight of Kitsy, who is all flint and composure with Theo, openly weeping as she enters her own apartment with Tom. This undeniable proof of infidelity hollows Theo, sending him spiraling into a night of insomnia and distracted labor the next morning in Hobie's antique shop. The next day is awash in paranoia, uncertainty, and the return of old suspicions. Theo reconsiders Kitsy's odd behavior, her absences, secretive communications, and subtle lies, all now seen in a new, cruel light. Even Kitsy's mother emerges as a figure of strategic deception, playing peacemaker and manipulator behind the scenes. Kitsy herself reaches out only timidly, with evasive texts and late-night messages, stoking Theo's anxiety and dread about their engagement and what, if anything, is real about their relationship. In the midst of this personal maelstrom, Boris bursts in with cryptic news. He believes he has a credible lead on the physical whereabouts of the Goldfinch, though details remain desperately vague. At the same time, there is ominous gossip about Lucius Reeve, dealer, and Theo's nemesis, whose interest in Theo is suddenly flagged as dangerous by Horst. Boris warns Theo that Horst, upon recognizing Theo's name, identified the connection to Reeve as potentially threatening and urges Theo to avoid him at all costs, as Reeve is unscrupulous and has powerful, even violent, backup in the form of Martin. The pressure on Theo is mounting from all directions: legal, criminal, emotional, personal. Amid all this, Theo, tormented by uncertainty about Kitsy, appeals to Boris for advice, asking what to do about suspected infidelity. Boris recommends directness: ask her in an unguarded moment, and watch for the truth in her response, and then, in his idiosyncratic way, assesses the calculus of love and possession. Those you love too much, he warns, will destroy you. It is better to settle for someone at a cool remove. This cold comfort only deepens the sense of isolation Theo feels. That evening, Theo goes to Kitsy's to confront her. The exchange is icy, bitter, and complex. Kitsy, with practiced composure, denies nothing, offering instead pragmatic reasons for her dual loyalties. She claims that her attachment to Tom Cable is in the past, insignificant now that she is engaged to Theo. She rationalizes her choices as the necessary navigation of familial and social pressures following the deaths of Andy and her father. Kitsy, always level-headed, declares their prospective marriage a practical match, a good arrangement, and presses Theo to see things in the same transactional terms. She is unfazed by revelations of Theo's own addiction and indiscretions, even welcomes his darkness as part of the package, insisting that together they make each other better or at least more palatable to the world and to themselves. Theo's anger melts into resignation. The cold serenity of Kitsy's logic exposes the emptiness lurking at the heart of their relationship. They go through the motions of intimacy, ordering food, sharing a bed, but for Theo, the weight of the unspoken is suffocating, and memories of past loves, like Julie from his adolescence, surface in the fraught, guilty silences. Dreams take hold that night, anxiety-ridden, haunted by visions of storage lockers with leaking fabrics, hints of loss and exposure mirroring Theo's terror about the fate of the stolen painting. He is preoccupied by its possible mistreatment, the risk of decay or destruction, all his obsessive reading about ruined masterpieces tumbling through his head. The painting, as ever, is a symbol of his own lost innocence, his mother, and the unattainable past. Before dawn, unable to sleep, Theo slips out of Kitsy's apartment for the refuge of hobbies and is stunned to encounter Pippa, freshly arrived from an unexpected change of travel plans. The presence of Pippa, vivid, red-haired, direct, momentarily upends Theo emotionally. Their interaction is charged but warm, rekindling the immediacy of feeling that Theo, entangled with Kitsy, has been starving for. Pippa's visit is casual. She will be leaving soon, but her very presence remakes the world for him. She brings news, small tokens, stories, and an openness that triggers all of Theo's dormant longing. He impulsively invites her to a movie, and this potential for renewed intimacy consumes his thoughts all day. His anticipation is adolescent in its awkward excitement, and the undercurrent of inappropriate hope is both thrilling and painful. Arrangements are made under the gentle supervision of Hobie, who with subtle kindness reads the situation but remains respectfully silent. Evening comes. At the movie, an art house documentary on Glenn Gould, Theo's joy at being near Pippa is quickly undermined by the realization that she is bored, or, worse, pained by what she watches. The film's depiction of Gould's eccentricity, isolation, and self-destructive creative drive is an unwelcome mirror for both of them. Afterwards, walking through snowy streets and searching for an elusive cab, the two duck into a cozy wine bar, where the relief of escape from the rigidities of their lives allows for deep, unguarded conversation. In the amber light, with knees touching under the table and half-smiles trading pain for fondness, Pippa confides the bitterness of her musical career cut short by trauma and injury. She speaks of grief, stagnation, and the suffocating sense of fate, the feeling that, after the bombing that shattered both their childhoods, nothing in her life was expandable, everything predetermined by the moment of loss. Theo is able to tender a version of his own experience, articulating the indescribable bond he felt with Welty in Welty's final moments, the strange inheritance of love and duty he has carried ever since. Together, they admit to the impossibility of returning to normal, of ever being fully healed or happy, but in this confession find a fleeting, bittersweet kinship. The following day, the fragile connection fades with the mundane routines of breakfast and preparation for the engagement party. Pippa and Theo are awkward with each other, reverting to formal politeness. The tiny window of genuine intimacy has already closed, and Theo is left with the ache of remembering how easy it was, once, to talk with her, how impossible now to sustain that ease. The engagement party itself, orchestrated with extravagance by Kitsy's godmother, Anne de Larmacin, brings together New York's elite in a spectacle of heritage, money, and societal expectation. Theo, an outsider in every way, moves through the event half-drunk, discomforted, and continually reminded of his outsider status both by the grand setting and by the patronizing assessment of those around him. He is waylaid by Havistock Irving, an elderly socialite whose feigned intimacy masks a history as both a sharp operator in the antiques trade and an informant to the art world criminal community. In conversation, Havistock hints to Theo that his reputation as a legitimate dealer is threatened. Lucius Reeve is gathering evidence, sniffing out every questionable transaction, and planning to expose or extort Theo for selling forged antiques. This warning unsettles Theo deeply. Mrs. Theo deeply. Mrs. Barber, wryly aware of the social challenges of the evening, offers little comfort, and Theo is left to seek out Hobie for reassurance and context. Together, in hurried whispers amid the crowd, they piece together Havistock's predatory background as a knocker, a scavenger in the world of estate sales and elderly marks, and his association with Lucian race name after name, scam after scam. The skeletons of the trade are paraded before Theo in all their compromised morality. Even as Hobie tries to steady him, it is clear that Theo's world is closing in. Legal peril, professional ruin, and the threat of criminal investigation haunt every interaction. Theo circulates numbly through the crowd, enduring forced congratulations and endless introductions. Kitsy flits about with the serene self-possession of someone who knows she is playing a role. Theo's attention, though, remains riveted on Pippa, who is animated in conversation with Boris, the only two real colors in this parade of grays. Boris, unexpectedly present and buzzing with good news, pulls Theo aside and reveals the urgency of a new opportunity. He thinks he has located the Goldfinch, and needs Theo to accompany him immediately to recover it. Passport, cash, a readiness to leave at once. Boris's demands are familiar, his tone earnest, his optimism contagious. Theo extricates himself from Kitsy with little effort. She is cool, practiced, unperturbed by his abruptness, and makes a perfunctory excuse about urgent business. She adapts seamlessly, demonstrating her capacity for smooth improvisation and indifference. Theo bids farewell to Hobie, who offers unspoken support, and tries in vain to find Pippa for a final goodbye. When he cannot, Boris collects him, and together they disappear into the night, leaving behind the mansion, the fiancé, the crowd, and every trinket of the life that has never truly been Theo's. Throughout these sequences, the psychological atmosphere is saturated with themes of fraud and imposture. Theo, engaged to a woman with whom he shares little true intimacy, is also professionally compromised by art forgeries and haunted by the illicit presence of the Goldfinch, a lost treasure that serves as an emblem both of hope and perpetual exile. All around him, relationships are fraught with deception. Kitsy's double life, Boris's loyalty at war with his role as a manipulator and fixer, the criminal underworld blending seamlessly with polite society at their engagement party. Above all, this part of the narrative is marked by the inescapable sense that Theo, for all his resourcefulness and resilience, is adrift amid forces beyond his control. The currents of fate, the weight of catastrophic memory, the lure of beauty, and the corrosive effects of guilt, devotion, and loss. Even in the brightest rooms, with all the trappings of luxury and affection, he is haunted by the distances between people, the impossibility of complete honesty, and the absence of his mother, the original wound from which all these agonies flow. As this sequence closes, Theo is propelled, once again, into movement and exile in pursuit of his missing treasure, accompanied by the only person who has never truly abandoned him, even as he leaves behind a world where he is both guest and imposter. The journey ahead promises resolution or disaster, but whatever the outcome, it is clear that the price of survival for Theo, for Boris, for Kitsy, and for Pippa is a kind of beautiful, desperate aloneness. The painting's fate and Theo's soul, intertwined in secrecy and longing, remain suspended between loss and hope as they step into the unknown. Theo's entrance into this sequence is abrupt, signaled by the urgency and secrecy that surround Boris's plan. The settings and personalities around Theo abruptly bring him to a new level of criminal involvement that far eclipses the antique shop and subtle forgeries of his New York life. The transition is marked the cold, impersonal task of traveling with men like Anatoly, whose jail tattoos and silent Russian reinforce a looming sense of threat, and Boris's blithe criminal confidence. Theo's pride in his own Russian-elapsed schoolboy's phrase collides with the dense, fast world his friend occupies, and there is little time for self-reproach. Boris briskly instructs Theo to grab his passport and whatever cash he can, emphasizing that the ostensible purpose is both a ransom and a performance. The cash is mainly for show. Boris plans to pay only enough to satisfy, then bluff his way through the rest with Caribbean bank drafts and a willingness to exploit his adversary's inexperience. Within Hobie's shop, Theo's internal division blossoms in full. There's a frantic practicality as he collects cash, clothes, and essentials, but his eye lingers on Pippa's boot screen in the dusty corridor, linked to happiness, which in turn recalls the Ozma of Oz first edition, a keepsake, and a note that is both confession and farewell. The note, "Safe trip. I love you. No kidding," represents what he cannot say aloud, expressing a clumsy, pure love that has remained unspoken through trauma and distance, a through line to his mother and to childhood joys now inaccessible. He adds the topaz necklace chosen for Pippa, draping it over her boots, the shade matching her eyes, a final gesture that mingles desperation and hope. He is alone in the act, defined by absence of love returned, of the mother lost, of any real sense of safety or home. The airport, then, is a zone of unreality, the cliches of travel for business and for pleasure, dislocation and tiredness among strangers, the mind-numbing routines of security. Theo moves through crowded terminals and coldly lit waiting areas, detached from the color and talk around him, too exhausted to think. Boris, as always, is cryptic and practical. Drink vodka, get sleep, ignore details. Upon waking in Amsterdam, Theo finds himself surrounded by floating fragments of happiness, dreams of Pippa, memories of his mother, as well as the nervousness of entering the criminal underworld, already set into motion. Amsterdam itself is both festive and ominous. Christmas decorations, clowns, fires, children. The cold and the canals, a landscape that triggers Theo's dissociation. There's a fairy tale element market scene, evergreen trees, ice, but it is streaked with anxiety, foreboding, and the inescapable strangeness that permeates all travel under duress. Boris admires the city's beauty, as if to underline their shared outsider status, and the pair traverse narrow streets damp with sleet. The old city, rich with antique shops, deepens the sense of connection to Hobie, a world of craftsmanship and integrity counterpoised against the night's impending violence and deception. A bar, dark, damp, with wood and maritime bric-a-brac, frames the negotiation. Boris's world overlaps with Theo's amateur input. Meals of sausages, bread, and beer mark the territory as emphatically Boris's. But Theo struggles to assert his priorities, the security and preservation of the painting standing in contrast to the single-minded pragmatism of everyone else at the table. The conversation threads from Horst's misadventures, the intricate social ties between Ulrika and Sasha, to the criminal entanglements that underlie the whole operation. Theo's suggestion to call the police and wash their hands lands like a misplayed note. It is the voice of sensibility from someone in over his head. The blank, appalled looks it receives tell him everything he needs to know. Morality and legality have no place. What is at stake is much larger and much more dangerous. The plan that Boris and his associates concoct is running on improvisation and hope. They will feign affluence, using cash and fake bank drafts to ransom back the stolen painting from desperate, inexperienced thieves Sasha and his circle. Identity is fluid, with Theo to pose as Ferruccio František, art dealer and man of means, reinforcing the performative, mask-wearing tension of the evening. The painting, which has survived bombing, theft, transit across continents, is here reduced again to a pawn, a chip in criminal bargaining. Every party acts out of self-preservation, trust is thin, and the logic of loyalty and betrayal. What will happen if Horst finds out, who owes what to whom, dominates the discourse. On the streets in the old city at night, Theo is overwhelmed, fatigue, cold, beauty, and a sense of being completely out of his depth. The city, with its bakeries and antique shops, becomes an extension of Hobie's world, yet here it is only a setting for anxiety, foreignness, and the growing weight of criminal consequence. The antique merchant's sense of value, care, and continuity, his hope for the right thing, feels laughably removed when facing the immediate dangers and mysteries of missing criminals, new meeting points, and the volatility of criminals with little to lose. At the hotel, distinctions between Theo's old and new life collapse further. There is no cakewalk in this criminal exchange. Theo's own vulnerability, barefoot, in hotel robe, being groomed to look rich enough, becomes a kind of black comedy, encompassing the farce and horror of the situation. The gun Boris assembles for dress-up drives home how extraordinary their improvisation is. Every step is risk, every calculation a form of play acting that may turn lethal at any moment. Boris's insistence on Theo's role as buyer, on doing everything by the book of criminal undertakings, thinly veils the panic and improvisation that actually govern the operation. Riding through the illuminated city, the Christmas lights and canal reflections stand in contrast to Theo's fear and disconnection. He is, for this moment, a passenger in a story that is wholly Boris's. The ruse a mixture of real and fake cash, performed affluence, and the expectation of danger is explained with confidence but exists on a knife's edge. Yuri is anxious about the location, underscoring the unpredictable, volatile nature of every step they take. The parking garage is a zone apart, drained of the city's holiday gleam, setting the stage for the next stage of criminal theater. The people Theo meets Victor Cherry, Shirley Temple are sketched out in quick, nervous exchanges, all coded and layered with terms of loyalty, caution, and self-interested distance. The painting is described by its function, its potential as collateral, as a means for an addict to get another fix, as a chip in a simple pawn, all with the implicit knowledge that any deviation from the performance could result in violence or betrayal of unimaginable costs. The Café de Parce Co. The Purple Cow is no locus of comfort but a closed, half-shabby backdrop for the exchange. Its walls are covered in the trappings of hippie sanctity and street-level alternate culture, a thin facade for cunning and danger. The dirty cat tray, the failed food, and the air of menace all strip away any sense that Amsterdam is a safe, picturesque refuge. The criminal bargain explodes into force as instead of a tense, silent exchange, violence erupts. Instead of money, weapons are drawn, and Theo finds himself thrown into sudden and terrifying proximity to real violence. Cherry's preemptive strike, the threatening of involved parties, and the overall confusion reinforce the randomness of fate and the constant risk of getting swept up in events one cannot control. The ambush at the Purple Cow is experienced through Theo's traumatized perceptions, blurred, fragmented, and reduced to basics: threat, cold, nausea. The criminal cast, including the memorable Shirley Temple, oscillates between nervous professionalism and adolescent bravado. Small details, cat toys, signs on walls underscore the surreal blend of normalcy and horror. Theo's forced assumption of an alias, handling of fake bank documents, and pretense of business acumen mark his extreme alienation, heightening the unreality as the violence flares. After the confrontation, escape and elation run together. There's relief, laughter, even a perverse form of celebration. Yet Theo's reaction is numb. He is physically and emotionally incapacitated, unable to process the speed of what has happened. The painting is at last in his hands, familiar and strange in the darkness of the stolen car, an object more real to him than the world in which he has just killed, or come close to killing, for its sake. The others, Boris, Cherry, jury trade honors, debts, and offers of payment, trafficking in a camaraderie built on shared risk and survival. Theo's dissociation is palpable as the events continue to spin lauder, jokes about violence, stories about debts paid and near misses in multiple languages. The painting stands at the center, testament to a continuity and hope that is otherwise almost erased by what has just occurred. Yet any sense of closure is immediately shattered. When Theo and Boris are cornered by Horst's men, the violence steps up abruptly. Guns appear, and the subsequent firefight is described in a blur of injury, reflex, sensory overload, blood, and panic. Theo finds himself not just an accessory but an active participant in killing. The skull-splitting violence, the sound, the blood, the terror marks both an ending and an erasure. Theo is both victim and survivor, more exposed and alone than before. After violence comes the urgent work of escape and concealment. Theo and Boris hastily attempt to wash blood from their hands, clothes, and faces and act as much about purging guilt as avoiding police detection. The urgency, improvisation, and comradeship reach a fever pitch. Wounds are bound, stories hastily concocted, every detail checked for possible implication. Theo's sense of self is gone, replaced by the survival needs: get rid of the evidence, get away, keep moving. There is no time for morality, for self-pity, or for plans. All that is left is improvisation and hope that the world will forget them, that life can resume at some later point without consequence. Boris's study in chaos, boldness, and calculation provides both comfort and terror in these moments. His explanations, his reassurances, his attempts to focus Theo on the practical, all attempt to hold the fear at bay. but Theo's trauma runs deep. The only way to make sense of the world is through movement, through quick thinking, and the repeated assertion of trust between himself and Boris, the only bond left unbroken. Boris's fluid talk, his planning, are all that support any sense of safety or order in the aftermath. When Theo must finally walk away, concealed beneath his one remaining coat, he is in a state of near collapse. Blood, fear, and guilt blend with cold and exhaustion. The city seems labyrinthine, impossible to navigate. Getting lost in the canals is a metaphor for the loss of self, of bearings, of any certainty that safety or home can be found again. The panic and self-reproach are overwhelming. Theo becomes convinced that every act of concealment is hopeless, that every step will lead to exposure. The hotel becomes a last redoubt, a place both familiar and threatening. Every gesture, the nervous exchange over the blood-stained cuff, passed off as chocolate sauce. The obsessive cleaning of coat and shirt, the scrubbing of tiles with soap and toothpaste is an attempt to expiate guilt and erase evidence. Theo's attempt to act normal with the hotel staff is intercut with intrusive memories of violence, reminders of the unbridgeable gulf between his present self and the world of safety, honesty, and love. Opioid refuge brings Theo not resolution, but relief by chemical abdication. Sleep is fevered and hallucinatory. Dreams of Andy, of travel and boats and failed efforts at carrying the past, the mixing of water and sailing and childhood. The echoes of violence persist even here, as his mind latches onto tasks impossible to accomplish, disassembling a boat, fitting it into a suitcase, emblems of the futility of carrying the past forward, of making sense of loss. Upon waking, the crash from heroin is profound physical misery, shivering, and a resurgence of guilt that is both metaphysical and visceral. The events are re-experienced in waves. The horror of killing, the shame and fear that accompany having lost the painting after so much, the deep existential realization that in trying to save a piece of beauty he has instead become a destroyer. The life that was supposed to be about preservation, the antique dealer's hope, the restorer's care, has ended with violence and loss. Throughout, the consequential loss of the Goldfinch itself, a totem of memory, love, endurance, is mirrored by Theo's own recognition that deathlessness, beauty, has meaning only in a world where people can survive to care for it. The realization that a frightened underage boy may, in terror, simply destroy the painting, or lose it, or discard it, is devastating. The painting's fate is now detached from Theo's hands, as random as chance itself, as subject to misfortune as any life. The entire episode is an immersion in the violence and randomness of the world beyond moral order and legality. The painting, once hidden and loved, is again lost. Theo, stripped of nearly everything, can only endure, carrying forward the trauma, guilt, and hope that something may yet come of the suffering. The language of survival, Boris's practical kindness, the camaraderie of criminals, the improvisations of violent substitutes for forgiveness or understanding. In the liminal hours after, the city itself becomes a stage for Theo's psychic wounds. Street signs unreadable, lights blurring, cold burning through what layers of identity and clothing remain. He is out of place, a fugitive. Efforts to regain safety entering the hotel, fumbling with explanations, scrubbing away at stains both literal and figurative, are futile. Guilt and shame persist. The fear of discovery shades every act, every conversation. And yet, even in the self-annihilation of traumatical oblivion, fevered dreams, the sense of world-ending despair, Theo is not entirely lost. There are flashes of humor and humanity, the absurdity of room service, the surreal pleasantness of hotel staff, the ultimate return of clothing apparently cleaned and undetected, the comic banality of tipping the laundry girl, and inventing stories about profiteroles. These small respites do nothing to resolve the overriding sense of futility and ruin, but they punctuate the narrative with reminders that survival can be, for brief moments, ordinary. The presence of the painting, as a symbol, looms over Theo's emotional and moral reckoning. Its value is not just monetary, but as a remnant of love, of the irretrievable past, of endurance across centuries. That it is again lost and possibly destroyed forces Theo to confront the limits of luck, fate, and human agency. His father's belief in patterns and meaning is savaged by experience. Beneath the conviction that things will work out is only emptiness, horror, and loss. Theo's trauma is defined not just by what he has done, but by what he has failed to do. The violence he has been party to taints the connection he once felt to his mother, to Pippa, to Hobie, to the values of art and beauty that once sustained him. All that is left is the possibility of survival, the movement forward, the chance that meaning may be wrested from the ruins, but only if one endures the guilt, the fear, and the knowledge of what has been lost. In sum, this sequence is a sustained immersion in the consequences of crime, violence, and the collision between memory, hope, and fate. Theo is forced to navigate escalating dangers by relying on trust, performance, and improvisation, only to be thrown into shattering violence and loss. The painting, a symbol of endurance, beauty, and love, is once more out of reach, its fate uncertain, mirroring Theo's own uncertain place in the world. The trauma that follows is both physical and metaphysical, a reckoning with the cost of survival and the impossibility of returning to innocence or safety. The narrative's relentless sensory detail, its mood of winter chill, blood, and blurred vision, underscore Theo's passage from theft, love, and redemption into a desperate search for meaning amid profound disarray and despair. In the days leading up to Christmas in Amsterdam, Theo finds himself isolated and adrift, both mentally and physically. Sickness and pervasive fear confine him to his hotel room, blurring the passage of time. The comfort of the television fails to distract him. Its random, incomprehensible contents only reinforce his alienation. When a fleeting image of his father appears on an old American cop show, Theo is struck by uncanny recognition and grief, a reminder of lost certainty and the untraceable origins of his own life's troubles. Theo's only connection to the outside world is a series of furtive interactions, room service delivered in the dead of night, brief exchanges with Dutch-speaking staff, and pre-dawn ventures to fetch local papers. He becomes obsessed with the news, scanning unfamiliar Dutch headlines for cognates that signal danger. Blood, murder, drugs, his personal belongings, stained clothes, serving as evidence of recent violence, become the focus of ritual attempts at cleansing, concealment, and disposal. Fear of being discovered runs alongside his illness and paranoia, every ordinary act fraught with the possibility of exposure or arrest. Sleep brings no relief. Instead, it delivers vivid, unsettling dreams, visions of snowy mountains, storm-swept seas, memories of his father and the barbers, and scenes of past family life merging with confusing signals from the present. Outside, the world is decorated for the holidays, yet Theo experiences it through a haze of fever and anxiety. His attention is consumed by newspaper stories about the killings on the Overtoom, references to Fritz and Martin, and speculation in the press about drug-related violence. The sense that he has set in motion a chain of uncontrollable events pervades his thoughts. Throughout these aimless days, Theo is both desperate for and terrified of contact with Boris. He replays instructions and fragments of their last chaotic moments together, uncertain if Boris is safe or implicated in even graver dangers. Theo cycles between longing to reach out to Boris for reassurance and panic that any contact may betray his location or further endanger them. Eventually, sickness, loneliness, and anxiety force his hand. He attempts to text Boris, but his phone dies, erasing his only link to the outside world and, specifically, Boris's number. With resources dwindling and the pressure of his circumstances building, Theo contemplates escape from Amsterdam. A cab to the airport, a U.S. address, the logistical hurdles of travel without a passport, and the prospect of turning to the American consulate. The loss of his passport locked away by Boris, now absent, sends him spiraling into further panic. A series of bureaucratic dead ends at Central Station and the U.S. consulate render him effectively powerless, unable to flee and unable to mend the situation. For all his desperate planning, he is trapped by a web of lost documents, administrative delays, and his own deteriorating health. Amidst this, Theo's internal monologue is punctuated by reflections on fate, meaning, and catastrophe. He recalls his father's fatalistic worldview, his own haunted sense that he has crossed irrevocable boundaries, especially after Martin's death. Images of destruction, both personal and historical, surge through his thoughts, reinforcing a sense of doom and moral insignificance in the face of loss. On Christmas Eve, battered by a worsening fever and the weight of his actions, Theo attempts to rid himself of incriminating evidence, his bleach-stained shirt, and make one last attempt at escape. Delirious, he is rebuffed by a railroad ticket agent for lack of documentation and is accosted by a stranger warning him not to attempt travel without proper papers. Resorting to the American consulate by payphone, he is stymied by bureaucracy and told to return with forms, photos, and a police report after the holidays. He's left with no options but inertia and the oppressive knowledge that he is stuck in every possible way. The night brings further deterioration. Theo's fever climbs, and he contemplates suicide in a trance-like state of exhaustion and hopelessness. He prepares letters to Hobie, Kitsy, and Pippa, seeking to unburden himself and offer some explanation or apology before ending his life. The process is halting and muddled by illness, shame, and overwhelming regret. As he prepares, memories of childhood, his mother, and the house in Chinatown rise unbidden, intermingling with grief and a sense of betrayal to those he loves. Yet, as he approaches the brink, Theo is granted a rare and profound dream of visitation from his mother. In the dream, she is clear and present, meeting his eyes in a mirror, her warmth and intelligence providing the comfort and validation he has yearned for since her death. This vision brings both catharsis and a shift in energy. When morning comes, Theo wakes enveloped by her presence, suffused with a sense of grace and the fleeting possibility of forgiveness and acceptance. This moment of transformation is tangible. Theo's resolve changes. He flushes the remnants of his drugs away and prepares to face whatever consequences are imminent. The impulse for flight is replaced with the determination to turn himself in and make things right however he can. He sets about making practical arrangements, returning valuables, preparing to notify authorities, and handling unfinished business. A last breakfast is ordered, its comforting simplicity steeped in the awareness that he is about to surrender himself. Theo's plans are interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Boris. Disheveled, exuberant, and irrepressible, Boris bursts into the hotel room, feigning irritation at the hotel staff but genuinely relieved to be reunited. Their reunion is at once antic and deeply charged. Boris immediately commandeers breakfast and begins regaling Theo with tales of his own exploits. Even as Theo sits dazed by Boris's vitality, old grievances and suspicions simmer beneath the surface. Boris, after some banter, reveals to Theo the true reason for his return. He returns Theo's passport, which he had retained. Then, in a twist, he presents Theo with a bag of cash, a fraction of proceeds from the reward for the recovery of the Goldfinch and other artworks. Theo reels from both the revelation that the painting has been returned, via Boris's orchestrated tip to authorities leading to the recovery of not just the Goldfinch but a host of stolen masterpieces, and the winding, often confounding logic by which Boris justifies his actions. Boris describes his improvisations with amusement and pride, explaining how they manipulated law enforcement, anonymous sources, and a host of intermediaries to ensure the safe return of the artworks and the collection of reward money. For Theo, the joy of the painting's recovery is complicated by loss. He had wanted to return it himself, to redeem himself through that act, and by the knowledge that Boris's machinations, while seemingly for the greater good, also upend his sense of moral simplicity. Boris, countering Theo's protestations, highlights the paradoxical nature of fate. Sometimes good comes from bad actions, sometimes a lost painting leads to the salvation of many lost works, perhaps only through a strange and winding road. Boris's worldview, irreverent, pragmatic, and guilt-resistant, both aggravates and challenges Theo's own sense of responsibility. They debate the meaning of good and bad, fate and consequence, and the possibility that mistakes and wrongdoing might serve a larger pattern beyond individual intention. Boris's metaphor of the biblical steward who returns a multiplied sum rather than the single coin he took resonates uneasily with Theo, leaving him questioning the boundaries between guilt and gratitude, redemption and accident. Having exhausted these arguments, Boris extends a friendly invitation: come to Antwerp, relax, take a break from worry. Theo, drained yet now grounded by the possibility of return and closure, declines in favor of returning home. The episode concludes with practical arrangements for Theo's journey, the disposal of evidence, and the restoration of Theo's ability to leave the country. Returning to New York, Theo finds Hobie. Their reunion is fraught. Hobie is preoccupied, distant, burdened with the knowledge of Theo's fraudulent dealings brought to light by Lucius Reeve, who has visited with documented accusations about the forged furniture. This confrontation, long dreaded by Theo, is marked by guilt, sorrow, and stilted attempts at explanation. Hobie's primary concern is not material loss, but the larger implications: trust, legacy, and meaning. The revelation about the fraud is soon overshadowed by discussion of the painting's fate and Theo's role in the tangled events that led to the recovery of so many lost works of art. Hobie listens patiently to Theo's account, omitting some of the worst details, and ultimately responds not with judgment, but with philosophical acceptance of complexity and irony. They reflect on the meaning of objects, beauty, and authenticity, how copies, restorations, and fakes can still transmit the shock of real beauty, how emotional resonance persists even when the physical object is lost, altered, or reproduced. Hobie relates Welty's experiences, further exploring the ways in which art can transform and rescue lives, and the irrational yet vital human impulse to connect with objects imbued with stories and meaning. As time passes, Theo embarks on a period of penance and restoration. Over the course of a year, he devotes himself to quietly buying back the forged pieces he sold, returning what he can, settling accounts, and trying in some small way to repair the damage he has done. These travels through the United States and abroad are exhausting and isolating, but they come with an odd serenity. The rhythm of hotel rooms, airports, and impersonal public spaces provides both exile and an unexpected comfort, a liminal space in which to process trauma and change. Theo finds himself contemplating anew the meaning of beauty, love, and desire. The painting that was once his fiercely guarded secret has become instead a window to something larger, a collective human inheritance, a pattern that encompasses both loss and redemption. The solace in art is not in its perfection or permanence, but in its ability to endure, inspire, and connect. The Goldfinch's image, crafted lovingly from pigment, passed hand to hand, lost and found, becomes for Theo both a metaphor and a reality. The suffering and joy it encapsulates are inseparable. The bird's patient endurance mirrors his own. Parallel with this journey, Theo attempts to untangle his relationships with those he loves. An unresolved engagement with Kitsy, amicably suspended, is balanced against his enduring ache for Pippa, who gently rebuffs his gifts and direct appeals but affirms a mutual, if precarious, love shaped by shared trauma. Their correspondence is marked by mature recognition of their dangerous similarities, their scars, vulnerabilities, and tendency to spiral together into darkness. This knowledge, though painful, provides insight. Desire, fate, and self-destruction intermingle with gratitude, tenderness, and acceptance. Theo's friendship with Boris resumes intermittently, colored by old dynamics but now clarified by dialogue about addiction, fate, and the inability to choose what one wants. Boris's brashness and self-destruction are an ongoing counterpoint to Theo's own struggles, each working through his limits with honesty and sometimes wit. Writing becomes for Theo not only documentation but a form of penance and self-examination. His notebooks, begun as letters to his mother, evolve into a record of learning, confession, and gradual recovery. They are a testament to the enduring centrality of the painting, the secret that shaped his life, his understanding, and his longing for beauty and connection. Through this act of writing, Theo grapples with the paradoxes of illusion and reality, the blurred boundaries where art, suffering, and love coexist. Meditating on the painting, Theo considers Fabricius's motives and biography, the mystery of the Goldfinch's creation, its accidental survival, and its special resonance. The painting becomes, for Theo, more than an object or symbol. It is an embodiment of suffering, endurance, and beauty in the face of captivity and disaster, a silent witness to continuity and possibility against all odds. Theo's final reflections spiral outward from personal sorrow to universal insight. He contemplates the futility, misery, and regret inherent in life, yet also locates within it a stubborn defiance and a capacity for joy. The capacity to love, to cherish what is imperiled, impermanent, and beautiful emerges as both privilege and triumph. The fate that brings disaster can also, through a bewildering sequence of events, bring redemption. The history of the painting, and those who cherished and pursued it, is a testament to love surviving disaster, a lineage in which Theo becomes a link by loving, preserving, and passing the story forward. Through these dark nights and luminous mornings, Theo at last finds a measure of hard-won acceptance. Life remains a catastrophe, and yet, in the task of preserving what death cannot touch, there is glory and grace. Suffering persists, but so does beauty, enduring not because it redeems suffering, but because it reveals meaning within it. Theo's connection to the Goldfinch and all those who have loved beautiful things before him is at once solitary and communal, a signal through chaos, carrying forward what is most human in the relentless tide of loss.